Chapter 4:16. Go to watch net. Just as the two of them were in a state of bewilderment and guessing at each other, Ziyuan suddenly appeared not far away from them. She said in a clear voice, "Stop guessing. Hurry up and go down. The young spirit is flying so high and fighting so fiercely. Are you afraid that heavenly thunder won't strike down?" Zhongling turned her head and sneered with an unkind look in her eyes. "Ziyuan, it's really a pleasant surprise that our Zhengyi school has a traitor like you." Li Yundong also snorted. "The winner hasn't been decided yet. What if this guy goes back on his word?" Zhongling said angrily, "Li Yundong, in terms of age, I'm older than your parents. In terms of seniority, I'm several generations older than you. How dare you humiliate me like this?" Li Yundong also said angrily, "Since you are older, why did you allow your disciple to provoke and humiliate Ziyuan again and again? Is this how you righteous sects do things? Come. We won't rest until we determine a victor today. Let's see if the heavenly lightning strikes you or me." Zhongling was extremely angry. She was about to fight with him again when she saw Zhou Ping, Du Fei, Zhang Yuan, and the others flying up. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. As soon as Zhou Ping saw Ziyuan, she shouted, "Do you want to bully us with numbers?" Li Yundong sneered. "Do you think we are like you?" Zhou Ping was so angry that she was about to refute. Du Fei, who was beside her, looked at the sky worriedly and advised, "Zhenren Zhang, Zhenren Li, I saw your battle just now. One of you is a famous Taoist, and the other is a rising star. This should have been a blessing for our Taoist school. As the saying goes, it's better to squash enmity than keep it alive. Moreover, it's a bit unethical to fight under the dark clouds of rolling thunder. I think it's better to stop for the time being." Zhang Yuan also stroked his beard and said with a compassionate expression, "Zhenren Du is right. I think there's something fishy about this heavenly lightning. Let's give up for now." Li Yundong said flatly, "No, you ruined my tea house on the first day of its opening. How can I do business in the future? We must determine the winner today." Zhongling also sneered and said, "Good, I want to see how capable you are, Akalanatha." Seeing that the two of them were about to fight again, the people next to them suddenly became anxious. Ziyuan advised, "Since there is a notary, why don't we let him decide who wins and who loses?" As soon as Ziyuan said this, the faces of Du Fei and Zhang Yuan stiffened. They cursed in their hearts, "Damn it, this Ziyuan really knows how to push the boat with the current and bring trouble to others. If he had known it would be like this, he wouldn't have joined in the fun and become a notary." Li Yundong turned his head to look at Du Fei, cupped his hands and said, "Zhenren Du, what do you think?" Du Fei looked embarrassed. He thought for a moment, narrowed his eyes, and gritted his teeth. "In my opinion, Zhenren Li did have the upper hand just now, and one of Zhenren Zhang's young spirit doppelgangers was destroyed. If the fight continued, it would be difficult to determine the outcome. But judging from the situation just now, Zhenren Li should have won." Zhongling laughed coldly, "Great, the Chuanzhen dragon sect has finally revealed its foxtail. Well said, Zhenren Du." Du Fei cupped his hands and said, "Zhenren Zhang, I'm just telling the truth." Zhongling snorted, turned to look at Zhang Yuan, and said coldly, "What did Leader Zheng say?" Zhongling thought to herself, "It seems that I won't be able to get away with it today. I offended Zhang Yuan last time, and I'm afraid he will take revenge this time." But just as Zhongling was thinking about this, Zhang Yuan said, "Zhenren Du is wrong. Since it's a battle of methods, how can the outcome be decided by temporary gains and losses? In my opinion, if the fight continues like this, Zhenren Zhang will definitely be able to reverse the situation with her profound cultivation foundation and various Shintong Taoist magic. So in my opinion, Zhenren Zhang should have won, because her cultivation skills are higher than Zhenren Li's." Hearing this, Zhongling was both surprised and happy. She thought to herself, "Did Zhang Yuan not care about the past? Was I wrong about him?" Li Yundong was angry in his heart. He sneered and said, "Zhang Yuan, I haven't settled the score with you last time. Do you want to die?" A glimmer of light flashed in Zhang Yuan's eyes. His face didn't change. He slowly stroked his beard and said, "Zhenren Li, what do you mean? I don't understand. I'm just speaking frankly. You can ask the others. In terms of cultivation, who is higher? You or Zhenren Zhang?" Li Yundong said angrily, Will the one with a higher cultivation win? In that case, it shouldn't have been Wu Hao and LV Fengping who died at the foot of the Himalayas, but me. Zhang Yuan suddenly became furious and said with a ferocious face. Li Yundong, what did you say? Li Yundong's words had pierced Zhang Yuan's heart. If Zhang Yuan also joined the battle and the cultivators fought in mid-air, the heavenly thunder would be attracted by their spiritual energy and zhenqi, and it would definitely fall faster. If it really fell, the consequences would be unimaginable. Zi Yuan immediately said, since the two notaries insist on their own opinions, we should let another notary judge who will win and who will lose. Hearing this, Du Fei immediately said, Zhenren Zi Yuan is right. Shen Wankai should be the judge. Zhang Yuan rolled his eyes and nodded in agreement. Zhang Ling sneered and said, he is just a mortal and can't see us fighting. How can he judge the outcome? Zi Yuan said, Zhenren Zhang is right, but since he can't see the battle between the two of you, why don't you add another battle that he can see, and then use it as evidence to let him decide the outcome? Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He said, Zhenren Zhang, you go first. I'll decide the rules for the second round. Zi Yuan's expression didn't change, but she praised Li Yundong's cleverness and tacit understanding in her heart. Zhang Ling was bold and conceited. Seeing that the lightning in the dark clouds above her head was getting fiercer and fiercer, she nodded and said, well, if you have any skills, just say it. After that, her figure flashed and she quickly flew to the ground. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan looked at each other and quickly flew back. As soon as Li Yundong's young spirit returned, he saw Zi Yuan and the others walk in one after another. The guests upstairs and downstairs of Desangxian were all staring at him, as if they were waiting for him to make the teacup appear. Li Yundong thought to himself, I can't say that I was evenly matched with Zhang Ling just now, so I have to add another battle. But now everyone is looking at me and wants me to make the teacup come out. What should I say? Li Yundong was thinking, but soon he had an idea. He cupped his hands and said, sorry to keep you waiting. I'll make the teacup come out later. As he said this, he said to Su Chan, Chaner, go find a big water jar or a big tea jar. Remember, it must be big, the bigger the better. Su Chan rolled her eyes. Although she didn't know what Li Yundong was going to do, she was very clever and said, it just so happens that I bought a big tea jar before. It happens to come in handy today. As she said this, she ran into the storage room and came out with a tea jar in one hand. Everyone looked at it curiously and was shocked. They saw that the tea jar in Su Chan's hand was as thick as the waists of two strong men, and it reached Su Chan's waist. It was more than 1 meter high. They laughed in surprise and said, how is this a tea jar? This is clearly a rice jar. It's strange. How could there be such a big jar in this tea shop? Su Chan carried the tea jar to the field and put it down easily. The tea jar fell to the ground with a muffled thud. Only then did everyone realize that the tea jar was extremely heavy. They immediately looked at Su Chan in surprise and thought to themselves, how could such a beautiful and lovely girl be so strong? How could she pick up such a big water jar with one hand? It's fine that there are so many beautiful women in Desangxian, but all of them have unique skills? It's amazing, really amazing. When Li Yundong saw the water jar, he nodded to Su Chan and said, go fill the tea jar with water. Su Chan sighed and turned to go into the back room. Zhou Qin, who was beside her, also said, I'll go help too. As soon as she moved, Chao Kefi, who had been watching the field eagerly, also said, I'll go too. Lu Feier rolled her eyes and followed her with a smile. After the beauties entered the back room, Su Chan looked back curiously and asked, why are there so many people here? I can do it alone. Zhou Qin smiled and said, well, you're the only one in the limelight. Can't I help master a little? Su Chan giggled and said, Sister Zhou Qin, help me carry 2 buckets of water later. Chao Kefi and Lu Feier didn't have time to look at the back room of Desangxian. They saw Su Chan and Zhou Qin each fill 2 buckets of water, and then walk out while talking and laughing. The buckets in their hands were deep and thick, and they were probably 20 or 30 kilograms full of water. However, the two of them lifted them as if they were light. Moreover, the water in the buckets didn't ripple, and not a single drop was spilled. Chao Kefi and Lu Feier were amazed. Chao Kefi winked at Lu Feier and said in a low voice, did you see that? They are masters, aren't they? Lu Feier nodded and looked at Su Chan and Zhou Qin in admiration. She whispered, look, they are so slim and weak. I didn't expect them to be so strong. Xueqi said in a low voice, this is not just about strength. Look at their buckets full. They walk so fast without spilling any water. This is kung fu. Lu Feier exclaimed, I really don't know how they learned it. Xueqi smiled and said, didn't you hear Zhou Qin say that she learned it from her master? Lu Feier asked curiously, who is her master? Xueqi laughed and said, you are a star. How can your observation skills be so poor? Didn't you see that when Zhou Qin talked to Li Yundong, she called him master? Of course, her master is Li Yundong. Lu Feier blinked her eyes and said, no way. How old is he? He should be about the same age as me, right? Xueqi smiled and said, there is no age difference in learning. Those who are capable can be teachers. The disciple is a master, and the master is definitely not inferior. Just watch. Lu Feier made a face and said, Humph, I'd like to see what he's going to do with such a tank of water and how he's going to change the cup back. Chapter 4:17. Go to Watch Network. At this time, the guests upstairs and downstairs of Desanxian saw Su Chan and Zhou Qin come out with 2 large buckets and fill the huge teapot at once. Go to Can Wang. 7K. Oath M. Li Yundong stood next to the water jar and said in a clear voice, everyone, watch carefully. Just now, Zhang Ling performed a little trick of making the cup in the teapot disappear without getting close to it. Now I will show you a little trick of sucking up all the water in the teapot without touching it. Shen Wankai smiled and said, Child Li, this trick of yours has nothing to do with making a teacup. Even if you can drink it all, how can you make the teacup appear? Li Yundong chuckled and said, don't worry, Mr. Shen. After I finish drinking the water in the teapot, it will be Zhang Ling's turn. If she can drink it all, then the teacup won't appear. If she can't drink it all, then the teacup will appear. Shen Wankai was surprised. What kind of logic is this? Strange, it's really strange. Shen Yu, who was standing to one side, sneered, turned his head away, and whispered with disdain, what a trick! However, Shen Hui had seen some of Li Yundong's magic. She watched curiously from the side, and it was rare that she didn't make any sarcastic remarks. At this time, the guests upstairs and downstairs were also whispering to each other and discussing. Hey, what do you think drinking water has to do with making a teacup? I don't know. I'm just curious. How can I drink water without touching the teapot? Are you stupid? If I don't touch the teapot, can't I use a cup? That's right. However, even if you drink it with a cup, how can you finish such a big jar of water? Can't you drink it slowly? You can finish it eventually. Ah, no way. Are we going to watch Child Li drink water slowly here? What's so interesting about this trick? This. Hey, why are you so serious with me? Just watch what Child Li does. Yes. Hey, no, you're the one who's serious with me. Li Yunyang ignored the crowd and said meaningfully to Zhang Ling. Zhenren Zhang, what do you think? Zhang Ling frowned inwardly. However, she was extremely conceited. If Li Yundong could do it, she could definitely do it as well. She said proudly, let's do as you say. Li Yundong nodded and said, okay. He cupped one hand in the other before his chest and said loudly, everyone, please watch carefully. In an instant, there was silence in the Desanxian building. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Li Yundong. Li Yunyang stood in front of the big water tank. He took a deep breath and shook his body. A force came from the bottom up, like an old bear shaking off lice. He shook the force to his hands. Li Yundong's hands were 1 foot above the water tank, and then he slowly pushed them as if he was doing Tai Chi. At first, everyone thought that Li Yundong was performing some kind of trick, but soon, they all widened their eyes and saw that the water in the teapot began to slowly rotate by itself. As Li Yundong's movements became faster and faster, the water in the teapot also began to rotate faster and faster. When the swirling water in the teapot was about to splash out, Li Yundong suddenly stopped and slapped both sides of the teapot with his palms. With a bang, a column of water suddenly rushed up from the center of the teapot. Li Yundong immediately took a deep breath, and the column of water went into his mouth. Although the crowd didn't know what Li Yundong was up to, they immediately cheered when they saw that Li Yundong's move was really elegant and beautiful. At first, their cheers were a little intermittent, but soon they found that Li Yundong's mouth did not stop sucking water. The water in the water tank was rapidly decreasing, and in a short time, the water level had dropped by 2 fingers. Li Yundong's breath seemed to be extremely long, and he had been sucking for a minute without stopping. At this time, the people upstairs and downstairs were all shocked. They stood up one after another and looked at Li Yundong with their eyes wide open. One by one, they cheered and applauded like thunder. At this time, Li Yundong's aura and Xueqi had surged to an incredible level. White steam was rising from the top of his head, and his clothes were fluttering without any wind. He was like an immortal descending to the world. The crowd watched for a while. 2 minutes later, Li Yundong's breath was still not stopped, and he had already sucked half of the water in the water tank. At this time, they were all so shocked that they even forgot to applaud and cheer. They just looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape and thought, is he still human? How did he do it? His mouth is more than 2 feet away from the water tank. How did he suck the water up? How could he breathe for so long without stopping? This half a tank of water should be at least 20 liters. How could he suck it all in one breath? Can he drink it? At this time, the expressions of Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling also changed slightly, and they looked at Li Yundong in horror. As cultivators, they naturally knew that Li Yundong was relying on his incomparably powerful and condensed Xueqi to absorb the water in the tank in the air. It was not difficult to do this, but it was difficult to hold on for such a long time. Seeing her master's ugly expression, Zhou Ping forced a smile and said, he won't be able to hold on for long. Zhang Ling snorted and didn't say anything. But another minute passed, and Li Yundong's breath was still there. At this time, everyone looked at Li Yundong and felt that he should have suffocated to death, but Li Yundong was still sucking the water in the tank. This made everyone have an illusion that the person in front of them was not a person, but a divine dragon that had descended from the 9th heaven. At this time, everyone upstairs and downstairs of Desanxian was shocked. Not only had they never seen anyone who could absorb water in the air, but they had also seen someone who could drink more than half of a vat of water in one breath. Moreover, even if they did not do these 2 things, they had never heard of anyone who could take a breath for 2 minutes without stopping. In the eyes of ordinary people, Li Yundong's continuous breathing for 2 minutes was simply not something that a human could do. No matter how large a person's lung capacity was, it was absolutely impossible for it to be so large. But they didn't know that at this time, Li Yundong's external qi had long been cut off, and it was the internal qi in his body that supported him. As the saying goes, when the mortal breath stops, the Xueqi rises, and it seems to exist unintentionally. It was his powerful Niden that was driving Li Yundong's qi. The Niden in his body was rotating at an astonishing speed, thus driving the Xueqi in his body to flow out continuously. Most people's Niden belonged to the fire attribute, but Li Yundong's Niden had been refined by the power of thunder and lightning when he had built the Xueqi phase in the Himalayas. It was born with the attribute of thunder and lightning, so it could be called a thunder-fire Niden. Thunder originated from water, and fire could quickly evaporate and dissolve water into steam. Therefore, the water that Li Yundong had absorbed into his body was quickly dissolved by his Niden into a large amount of water vapor, which then evaporated from the Bai Hui acupoint on the top of his head. After another minute, the water tank was about to be bottomed out. Everyone saw white steam rising from the top of Li Yundong's head. A white line rushed straight to the roof and quickly spread out and rolled, like 3 mist flowers. It was as if 3 flowers had gathered above one's head. In the mist, Li Yundong's clothes and black hair fluttered without any wind. He was really like an immortal with great magical power, which was awe-inspiring. After an unknown period of time, Li Yundong suddenly sucked up the last drop of water in the water tank. Only then did everyone let out a sigh of relief. It was as if the past few minutes had been as long as centuries. They all looked at Li Yundong in a daze and couldn't say a word, as if what had just happened had exceeded their imagination. The shop of Desanxian was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. Li Yundong didn't touch the tank and sucked up all the water in it. His stomach didn't bulge, and his body didn't look cumbersome or heavy at all. He lifted the water tank with one hand and turned it upside down. Then he turned it around and showed it to the people around him, showing them that there was no drop of water left in the tank. At this time, people seemed to wake up from a dream and let out an earth-shattering cheer. The sound almost lifted the roof. The celebrities sitting on the 2nd floor were so excited that they applauded like thunder. They whispered to each other, "This is incredible. This is not a trick. This is obviously an immortal. Immortal. This is definitely an immortal." Someone else shouted, "Immortal Li, one more." Lu Feier was so excited that her little hands turned red, but she didn't know it. Xueqi was still able to control herself. She applauded elegantly and politely, but her elbow was hitting Lu Feier hard, and she kept saying, "How is it? Is it a master? Is it a master?" Lu Feier admired Li Yundong to the extreme in her heart and kept applauding, but she was a little unconvinced by Xueqi and said, "The teacup hasn't come out yet." Yin Mengfan looked at Li Yundong strangely, and from time to time, she looked at Shen Wankai, Shen Yu, and Shen Hui, who were so shocked that they couldn't speak. There was a thoughtful look in her eyes. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others also looked at each other with strong joy and admiration in their eyes. They were all knowledgeable people, and they knew how terrifying it was for Li Yundong to be able to do this. Not only them, but even Zhang Yuan and Du Fei looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look on their faces. Ding Nan also looked at Li Yundong in shock, and there was a strong sense of worship and admiration in her eyes. Although Zhou Ping had seen Li Yundong's ability several times, Li Yundong's move today made her hair stand on end. She naturally knew how strong and condensed Xueqi was to be able to do this. How terrifying and powerful was his Niden to be able to break down so much water in an instant. Zhou Ping glanced at her master uneasily, only to see Zhang Ling staring at Li Yundong with an extremely ugly expression. She didn't say a word. After a long time, she narrowed her eyes slightly, as if she had made a major decision. Li Yundong turned around to let everyone see that there was indeed no water left in the water jar. He turned around and was about to speak to Zhang Ling, but suddenly, a teacup fell from the air. The speed at which the teacup fell was so fast that it almost seemed that someone had deliberately thrown it to the ground in exasperation. Li Yundong was quick to react. His body spun like a top, and he put the teacup on the ground with one hand. He lowered his other hand, like a monkey fishing for the moon. His wrist turned softly, and his palm caught the teacup firmly. Everyone saw a flash of white light, and an object shaped like a teacup quickly fell from mid-air. Then, Li Yundong's body spun. When he stood up again, he was holding a teacup in one hand and standing proudly with the other behind his back. Li Yundong said loudly, "Everyone, please look. I've changed the teacup back." At this moment, everyone felt as if they were watching a Hollywood blockbuster. The ups and downs made them breathless. It was only at this moment that they could finally exhale all of their breaths, put down all the stones in their hearts, and cheered loudly. Li Yundong held the teacup high and said to Zhang Yuan and Du Fei, "Do you want to see if it's the original teacup?" Zhang Yuan and Du Fei were both shocked by Li Yundong's move just now and shook their heads. Li Yundong turned around again and said to Chen Wankai, "Mr. Shen, do you want to have a look?" Chen Wankai walked up trembling with excitement. He looked at Li Yundong as if he was looking at a living immortal. He held the teacup in Li Yundong's palm with both hands and looked at it carefully. Then he shouted, "Yes, yes, this is the teacup." Chen Wankai was extremely excited. He gave a thumbs up and said loudly, "I, Chen Wankai, have traveled all over the world and seen countless strange people, but Child Li, you are the most powerful one I have ever seen. I, Chen Wankai, am convinced." At this time, the outcome of the battle was self-evident. Zhang Ling snorted coldly. She knew that she didn't have such a long Xueqi aura. Unless she used magic, she couldn't absorb water with Xueqi like Li Yundong did. Her face was ugly, and she walked out without saying a word. Seeing that the situation was not good, Zhou Ping immediately followed her out. When they left, Zhao Yuzhen of the tea house of Zhao had already been helped up by the beautiful women in Cheongsam, but he was still standing there like a stone statue. Before Zhou Ping left, she glanced at her and secretly cursed in her heart, "If it weren't for the fact that this useless thing is so incompetent, why would we have to force our way out?" Humph! When the two of them left the Desanxian shop, they could still hear the people inside cheering loudly, especially the cheers of Li Yundong's classmates. Zhang Ling felt that these voices were extremely harsh. She said to Zhou Ping with a livid face, "No matter what means you use, you have to find a way to get the Heavenly Jindan technique for me." Zhou Ping was stunned for a moment. "The Heavenly Jindan technique?" Zhang Ling said angrily, "Are you deaf? If Li Yundong hadn't practiced the Heavenly Jindan technique, how could his qi be so long and his Niden be so powerful? Now he is already so strong at the 8th stage. If he breaks through to the 9th stage in the future, will there still be a place for us in the world?" Vote for recommendation. Previous page, return to table of contents. Next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf. so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 4:18. Go to watch net. As soon as Zhang Ling and Zhou Ping left, the people upstairs and downstairs of Desanxian fell into jubilation. Zhang Yuan, who had been against Li Yundong before, also cupped his hands and said to Li Yundong with a smile on his face, "Congratulations on the successful opening of Zhenren Li's tea house." "Congratulations." Li Yundong glanced at him and said coldly, "Thank you very much. Go to watch net." 7K. O.M. At this time, Ding Nan also said to Li Yundong with mixed feelings, "Li Yundong, I know you have some opinions about me, but no matter what, we used to be classmates. For the sake of our former classmates, I wish you a prosperous business and a lot of money." Hearing this, Li Yundong also felt a myriad of emotions in his heart. He looked at the tall girl in front of him with a complicated look in his eyes, sighed, and said, "Ding Nan, I know I can't persuade you now. But, alas, you're on your own." Ding Nan's eyes darkened. She lowered her head, as if she didn't want Li Yundong to see the feelings in her eyes. She said in a low voice, "Then I'll go first." After that, she walked away quickly. Zhang Yuan narrowed his eyes slightly and said to Li Yundong meaningfully, "Zhenren Li, your relationship with my beloved disciple is quite good?" Although Li Yundong didn't know why Ding Nan had become Zhang Yuan's disciple, he guessed that there must be some secret reasons. He also knew that Zhang Yuan was a cunning and ruthless person, so he deliberately said vaguely, "There is no hatred in this world that can't be let go, and there is no grievance that can't be solved. What's more, your disciple has a good relationship with me in the past. What's wrong? Leader Zheng, is there something you can't figure out?" Zhang Yuan said with a fake smile, "It's nothing, Zhenren Li. The Taoist assembly will be held in a month. We'll meet again." After that, he cupped his hands and left with a flick of his sleeves. For a moment, Ding Nan couldn't help showing her true feelings in front of Li Yundong, but after she left, she secretly regretted it. She was very clear about Zhang Yuan's thoughts and means. If she revealed a flaw and let him know that she was not LV Fengping, she would definitely die. Ding Nan didn't go far before she stopped. When Zhang Yuan came up to her, she whispered, "Master, I'm sorry." Zhang Yuan put his hands behind his back and said lightly, "Oh? Where did that come from?" Ding Nan said in a low voice, "I know you will overthink what I said just now, Master, but I have no choice." Zhang Yuan said indifferently, "Oh?" Ding Nan said with tears in her eyes, "Master, you've seen it. This Li Yundong is too strong. I really don't dare to hope that I can succeed in my revenge. I just hope that you won't have any enmity with him in the future. If this strong man comes and kills you again, then I will have no one to rely on in this world." Ding Nan had been rolling around Zhou Qin's side for a long time, so her acting skills had long been honed to perfection. When she cried, she really looked like a pear blossom in the rain, which made people feel sorry for her. Zhang Yuan's face, which had been tense, suddenly relaxed. He said, "You don't have to talk to him so affectionately. Those who don't know might think, humph." Ding Nan continued, "Master, in this way, we can numb Li Yundong and relax his vigilance. Secondly, we may resolve the grudge between him and us. If something happens in the future, we will have a strong ally." Zhang Yuan nodded slightly. "You're right. Li Yundong's cultivation speed is really terrifying. I have lived for so many years, but I have never seen such a powerful young man. If he is a friend and not an enemy, it will be a great thing." Ding Nan couldn't help but feel happy, but soon Zhang Yuan changed the topic and said, "But do you think Li Yundong is a fool? Do you think you can turn an enemy into a friend by saying these words?" Ding Nan cussed in her heart. This old pervert is really hard to fool. Ding Nan sobbed softly again and said, "Master, this body of mine used to be Li Yundong's classmate, and our relationship was quite deep. He didn't know that I had already occupied the body of his former classmate, so he didn't know the secret and thought that I was his classmate. I knew this, so I said those words boldly, but I didn't expect that it would make you doubt me. Please punish me." After that, Ding Nan was about to kneel down. Although Zhang Yuan was cruel and merciless, he was also a person who cherished flowers. He stopped her with a hand and said with a smile, "There are so many people here. What are you doing? Let's go. Since you don't have such thoughts, I won't doubt you. But if you have any ideas in the future, you should tell me in advance. Otherwise, it will be bad if there is a gap between master and disciple. Ding Nan smiled through her tears and said, Thank you for your magnanimity, master. Zhang Yuan smiled and took Ding Nan's hand. Let's go back. The Taoist assembly will be held in a month. I have to prepare well then. Ding Nan felt goosebumps all over her body when Zhang Yuan held her hand, but she couldn't shake it off, so she forced herself to smile and said, I hope you can show your power at the Taoist assembly and suppress all the heroes. Zhang Yuan couldn't help laughing when he heard this. As he touched Ding Nan's hand, he said with a smile, I need your help. Ding Nan was extremely disgusted. She forced a smile, but in her heart she thought, this lecture is going too far. I have to think of a way. Although Zhang Yuan's face was also full of smiles, there was still a trace of doubt in his heart. Pinger has been a little strange since she took possession of me. Although she said that today, I still feel that it's a little strange. No, I have to test her again when I have a chance in the future. The two of them talked and laughed happily along the way, but in secret, they had their own thoughts and ulterior motives. In De Sanxian's shop, Li Yundong suddenly became the focus of everyone's attention. The reason why many celebrities from all walks of life had come to attend the opening ceremony of this small tea house was all for the sake of the Zhou family. If the Zhou family had not recovered, Zhou Qin would not have been able to ask these people to come even if she had knocked her head. But now that the Zhou family had made a comeback, these people had come uninvited. In the officialdom, there was nothing more hypocritical than this. At the beginning, many of them had subconsciously regarded Li Yundong as half a son-in-law of the Zhou family. Therefore, although they were polite, they had never thought in their hearts, this lucky guy has climbed up a high branch, a guy who lives off women, and so on. But now it seemed that they were all looking at Li Yundong with new eyes and were shocked. Only then did some people understand what it meant when Zhou Qin respectfully called Li Yundong master. It turned out that this overly young boy was really a great master. Lu Feier looked at Li Yundong with excitement and fanaticism. She grabbed Chao Kefi's clothes hard and said anxiously, Sister Chao, this guy is really a master. He's so tall. Chao Kefi also looked at Li Yundong in awe. She had known that Li Yundong was a strange person, but in her opinion, he was a master of kung fu. However, she hadn't expected that Li Yundong's kung fu would far exceed her expectations and imagination. It had already gone beyond the scope of human beings and was awe-inspiring. Chao Kefi was pulled away by Lu Feier. She withdrew her gaze from Li Yundong and scolded with a smile. Are you convinced now? Lu Feier nodded her head like a chicken pecking rice. I'm convinced. How did he do it? Chao Kefi smiled and said, I don't know. Why don't you ask him? Lu Feier's eyes lit up at first, but when she remembered Li Yundong's attitude towards her before, her face suddenly fell. Humph, this guy not only has eyes on the top of his head, but he's also short-sighted. He doesn't care about me. Chao Kefi covered her mouth and laughed. Oh, even a big star is useless? Lu Feier said angrily, Sister Chao, I'm kind enough to accompany you out. How can you laugh at me like this? Chao Kefi laughed and said, It's obvious that you want to skip work. You even threw your agent aside and turned off your cell phone, didn't you? Humph, I'll see what you can do when you turn on your cell phone later. Lu Feier said with a smile, Who told her to be so strict with me all day long? Let her be anxious. Humph. But, Sister Chao, you can't do this. At least let me figure out what's going on. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep tonight. Chao Kefi snorted and said, I can't help it. Although he is young, he has a lot of ideas in his mind. Didn't you see that I was frantically looking for him a while ago? This heartless thing actually disappeared without saying a word. It's useless to beg such a person. Lu Feier looked disappointed. If I had known this would happen, I might as well not have come. Isn't he just trying to make me depressed? Yin Mengfan, who was standing to one side, suddenly smiled and said, Lu Feier, don't worry. I guess my uncle will ask Li Yundong to be Shen Yu and Shen Hui's teacher in a while. Chao Kefi asked curiously, How do you know? Yin Mengfan looked at Shen Hui, then turned her head to Chao Kefi and said with a smile, Shen Hui secretly told me that the old master wanted to invite Zi Yuan and Li Yundong to be Shen Yu and Shen Hui's family teachers. I think the old master brought them both here today. It's very likely that he wants to worship them in public. Lu Feier couldn't help but interrupt. What does that have to do with me? Yin Mengfan said with a smile. Shen Hui and Shen Yu are both your fans. If Li Yundong accepts them as students, you can save the country in a roundabout way and find out what's going on from the two of them. Lu Feier laughed and said, That's a good idea. But will Li Yundong accept them as disciples? Chao Kefi smiled and said, I think so. Old Master Shen has a lot of influence. While they were talking, Shen Wankai quickly calmed down after his excitement. He said very seriously and sincerely, Young Master Li, the last time we parted in Dongwu City, I was very impressed by the demeanor of you and Miss Zi Yuan. I admired you very much. I wanted to visit you as soon as possible, but I couldn't find your whereabouts. Yesterday, I accidentally heard that young Master Li was going to open a tea house in Tiannan City. I was pleasantly surprised, so I came uninvited. On the one hand, I wanted to congratulate the opening, and on the other. As he said this, he pulled Shen Yu and Shen Hui, who looked reluctant behind him, forward and said, This is my son and my daughter. I believe that young Master Li also knows my son. Haha, he and young Master Li also had some misunderstandings before, but I believe that young Master Li is magnanimous and will not care about it. Moreover, young people don't get to know each other without fighting. As for my daughter. Shen Wankai looked at Shen Hui, but the baby-faced girl suddenly snorted and turned her face away. She didn't buy his words at all. The smile on Shen Wansai's face froze, but he quickly smiled and said, This girl is still shy. Li Yundong smiled slightly and didn't answer Shen Wansai's words. He just looked at him calmly, not at all flattered. Shen Yu saw this and snorted in his heart. In his opinion, what kind of person was his father Shen Wankai? He was a person who would tremble everywhere in Tiannan City if he stamped his feet. He came to ask Li Yundong to be his teacher, which was to give Li Yundong a lot of face. That was to be courteous. But this fellow, he only knew a little trick and was putting on airs. Humph, what's the big deal? Shen Wankai didn't know what his son was thinking. He smiled and said to Li Yundong, I believe that young Master Li also knows my daughter. Haha, I have a presumptuous request. I hope young Master Li will do me a favor. At this time, Li Yundong had already guessed that Shen Wankai wanted him to accept Shen Yu and Shen Hui as his disciples, but he also muttered in his heart, accepting disciples is not like buying cabbages in the market. Moreover, Shen Hui has always been against me. If I accept her as my disciple, wouldn't the world be in chaos? Moreover, Shen Yu's character was quite bad, and he really didn't like him. How could he accept him? But if he didn't accept him, Li Yundong didn't know how to make Shen Wankai step down. He hesitated for a moment and only hoped that Shen Wankai wouldn't say that he wanted to be his disciple. Shen Wankai then said, Young Master Li, can you accept my son and my daughter as your disciples? I don't want to learn anything else. I just want to be able to follow you and pour tea. I want to learn from you, young Master Li, who is indifferent to favors and insults, and has a deep and profound cultivation skill. That's enough. Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart when he heard this. He thought to himself, sure enough, here it comes. Should I accept them or not? Vote recommendation, previous page, return to table of contents, next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Raising a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Raising a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Raising a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 419. Go to watch net. As soon as Shen Wankai said this, the people upstairs and downstairs of Desanxian immediately quieted down. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Li Yundong, wanting to see how he would choose. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. Shen Wankai also looked at Li Yundong with bright eyes. He had a smile on his face and his eyes were full of confidence. In his dictionary, there had never been the word impossible. If he, Shen Wankai, wanted to do something, he would always succeed. What's more, in this situation, he had no other choice but to agree. Besides, he had given Li Yundong enough favor and face. For the sake of his feelings, Li Yundong would also agree. But Shen Wankai didn't expect that at this time. Shen Hui suddenly secretly stepped on Shen Yu's shoes with the tip of her foot, and then quietly stuffed a paper ball into his palm. Shen Yu glanced at Shen Hui and secretly opened it. His face suddenly changed. He saw that the paper ball said, "I don't care if you want to call this guy master in the future, but do you also want to call your dream lover masteress?" Shen Yu suddenly felt as if his heart had been stabbed by a knife. He jumped up and shouted, "I don't want to take him as my master." In this quiet tea house, Shen Yu's voice was extremely loud. Everyone suddenly burst into an uproar, and then they began to talk. Shen Wankai narrowed his eyes slightly, but the smile on his face remained unchanged. He laughed and said, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Shen Yu straightened his neck and shouted, "Who's talking nonsense?" He pointed at Li Yundong and said angrily, "How can he be my teacher? Learning qi cultivation kung fu? Bah, what era are we in? Why are you still learning this? Dad, you're old and muddled. What's the use of learning this nowadays?" Shen Wankai trembled slightly, and the smile on his face disappeared little by little. He said in a cold voice, "What did you say? Say it again if you have the guts." Shen Wankai was extremely dignified at home. His face darkened, and Shen Yu's heart suddenly trembled. He didn't dare to say anything else, but his face still turned red. He turned his head away and panted heavily, refusing to take Li Yundong as his master. Seeing such an awkward scene, everyone stopped talking and looked at the changes in the field with different gazes. Chen Wankai suppressed his anger and said in a deep voice, "I've already decided on your matter. It's settled." Shen Yu jumped up and shouted, "No, I won't take him as my master even if I die." Chen Wansai's entire body trembled as he clenched his fists tightly. If it wasn't for his strong willpower and shrewdness, he would have done it on the spot. Shen Hui rolled her eyes and quickly said, "Dad, I'll persuade him." After that, without waiting for Shen Wankai to agree, she pulled Shen Yu and whispered, "Stop talking. Let's go. Do you want to die?" Shen Yu was not a fool. He immediately understood. He pushed Shen Hui away and said angrily, "Who asked you to pretend to persuade me? I don't need you to care about me." With that, he turned around and ran. The entourage who had followed Chen Wankai saw that something was wrong and subconsciously wanted to chase after him. But Chen Wankai shouted in a deep voice, "Don't chase after him. Let him go. If you have the guts, don't enter the house." The entourage stood there awkwardly. He looked at Shen Yu's back and then at Chen Wankai, like a clay puppet. Chen Wansai's face was livid. He looked at Shen Hui meaningfully and said lightly, "You persuaded me well." Although Shen Hui smiled, she shivered in her heart. She thought to herself, "It's over. I'm going to be punished by the old master again this time. Humph, it's all Li Yundong's fault. Every time I meet him, nothing good happens. Damn it, damn it." Chen Wankai hadn't expected that the matter he had been so confident in would turn out like this. Although he felt that he had lost face, he still forced a smile and said to Li Yundong, "Child Li, my son has not been disciplined well. I've made a fool of myself." Li Yundong secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He smiled and said, "It's normal for young people to be arrogant and full of vigor." Chen Wankai sighed and said in a very old manner, "Child Li is young and magnanimous. I have never seen such a person in my life. Just now, I was lucky enough to witness Child Li's divine skill. It was really amazing. It's a pity that the scene was not right. Otherwise, I would have had a few drinks with Child Li. Today, I'll go first. Child Li, I wish you a prosperous business and a prosperous future." After that, Chen Wankai didn't look around. He just cupped his hands to Li Yuanbo upstairs and said, "Secretary Li, goodbye." Li Yuanbo smiled and raised his teacup to him as a salute. Feng Na, who had been watching the show from the side, saw the old man leave with his daughter. In this room of dignitaries, he only greeted Secretary Li and ignored everyone else. She secretly stuck out her tongue and whispered, "How bold he is. He even ignored the mayor." Cheng Cheng laughed in a low voice and said, "So what if he's bold? Isn't he still begging Li Yundong?" Feng Na sighed softly and looked at Li Yundong with admiration in her eyes. "When I first saw him at school, I knew that he was not an ordinary person. But now, more than half a year has passed, and he has become a person that I don't even dare to recognize. I wonder what he will become in another 6 months." Cheng Cheng smiled and said, "What else can he do? Is he no longer our classmate or friend after he becomes the President of the United States? Li Yundong is not the kind of person who can't be reached just because he is rich. Feng Na nodded and said with a smile, that's his charm. Look at the people he's talking to now. You can see that his realm has made us look up to him, but he still doesn't put on any airs and jokes when he wants to. The two of them whispered. At this time, Li Yuanbo, who was upstairs, looked at his watch, then got up and said with a smile, it's getting late. Today, I've broadened my horizons and watched a good show. This trip was really worth it. I'll go first. As soon as he moved, the guests upstairs all got up to see him off. Li Yuanbo came downstairs, shook hands with Li Yundong, and said with a smile, Shaoli, your kung fu is a bit shocking. How did you practice it? Li Yundong chuckled and said, I was just practicing for fun. Seeing that Li Yundong was unwilling to tell him, Li Yuanbo also smiled and said, well, I'll go back and practice blindly. Let's see if I can make any progress. Li Yundong laughed and said, haha, Secretary Li, you must be joking. Li Yuanbo laughed and let go of Li Yundong's hand. Then he said to Zhou Qin, who was next to him, Qin, will you see me off? Although Zhou Qin was a little surprised, she quickly smiled and said, okay, Uncle Li. Li Yuanbo nodded and turned to leave. He didn't get in his car, but just walked slowly on the pedestrian street with his hands behind his back. Seeing that he wasn't getting in the car, the driver who had come with him had to drive slowly behind him. After a while, Li Yuanbo suddenly stopped and played with the file he had taken from Li Yundong. He smiled and said to Zhou Qin meaningfully, Qin, tell me honestly, what are you learning from Li Yundong? Zhou Qin was stunned. Although her words were sharp and her mind was quick, she didn't know how to answer for a moment. Li Yuanbo stared at her closely and said, you don't want to tell me? Well, I'll tell you. Li Yuanbo raised his head and said leisurely, he's a cultivator, isn't he? Zhou Qin was shocked. Uncle Li, are you spying on him? Li Yuanbo chuckled. How dare this bold guy play such a trick in front of me? Does he think I can't tell? Zhou Qin asked nervously, Uncle Li, in fact, Li Yundong is not what you think. Li Yuanbo didn't wait for her to finish. He raised his hand and interrupted her saying, don't be nervous. I have no prejudice against cultivators. Moreover, the destruction of the four olds and the 10 years of turmoil in the country had also caused great damage to the cultivation world. The older generation felt very apologetic, so they had turned a blind eye to the development of the cultivation world over the years. But you have to tell him not to cross the line by playing with fire. Something like young master he must not happen again. Otherwise, no one will be able to protect him. Zhou Qin was relieved and said with a smile, Uncle Li, don't worry. He won't. Li Yuanbo saw that although Li Yundong was young, he was also well-behaved and quite calm. As he spoke, he also let Zhou Qin change the topic to warn Li Yundong. He nodded slightly, smiled, and said, how long have you been with him? This sentence was a little ambiguous. Zhou Qin's cheeks turned slightly red, and she whispered, about a month. Li Yuanbo looked at Zhou Qin and sighed softly. You can cultivate so fast in a month. Has there been such a big change? Zhou Qin looked at herself in a daze. Have I changed a lot? Li Yuanbo shook his head and said with a smile, you really don't know the true face of Mount Lushan. Compared with your former self, it's like you've been reborn. I don't know which sex cultivation method Li Yundong is cultivating. How can he make progress so fast? I met some old comrades and they... At this point, Li Yuanbo suddenly realized that he had said something wrong. He immediately shut his mouth and changed the topic. Hey, don't practice some crooked kung fu with him. Otherwise, I won't be able to explain it to your father. Zhou Qin was a little confused at first, but she quickly reacted. Her cheeks turned red and she said angrily, Uncle Li, how can you be so disrespectful? What are you talking about? Li Yuanbo laughed and said, forget it. Go ahead and go your own way. Alas, you don't want to take the road of politics, but you want to take such a difficult and dangerous road. Zhou Qin smiled sweetly and said, Uncle Li, as the saying goes, infinite glory lies in the dangerous peak. Moreover, cultivation is the most inspirational thing in the world. There are not so many troubles of intrigue and deception. You can also jump out of the mortal world and get rid of old age, illness, and death. Why not? Li Yuanbo sighed in his heart when he heard this. Yes, if you can jump out of the mortal world and get rid of old age, illness and death, why not? Zhou Qin saw that Li Yuanbo's temples were gray, which was obviously due to his hard work. She whispered tentatively, Uncle Li, do you want me to secretly teach you some cultivation kung fu in the future? When Li Yuanbo heard this, he immediately waved his hand and said, No, there are rules in the system. We are atheists. You can't hurt me. Anyone who has anything to do with these things will be removed. Those who have anything to do with cultivation are all nominal positions. If people like us have anything to do with it, we will die. Zhou Qin sighed and said, What is this? You might as well not be an official. Li Yuanbo laughed and sighed. It's easy to go up the mountain, but it's difficult to go down. When you climb to a certain height, it's not up to you to decide whether you can go down or not. Forget it, it's getting late. I should go back. As he said this, he turned and walked to his car. Zhou Qin looked at his old back and suddenly asked, Uncle Li, if you had to choose from the beginning, which path would you choose? Li Yuanbo stopped and was silent for a while. He turned around and said with a smile, The affairs of the mortal world are in chaos. How can I be at ease? Envy is returned to herding horses to the southern mountain. After that, Li Yuanbo turned around and left laughing. Zhou Qin chewed over the words, Envy is returned to herding horses to the southern mountain over and over again. For a moment, she was a little stunned. She thought to herself, It turns out that a high-ranking official like Uncle Li also envies me very much in his heart? Happy New Year, children. Chapter 420. Go to watch net. When Li Yuanbo's car was far away, Zhou Qin came to her senses and slowly walked back. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. At this time, most of the guests in Desanxian had left. Li Yundong saw that the students who had come to support him had all left. At this time, there were only the people from the Fox Zen School, Zi Yuan, and the others left in the store. Feng Na, Cheng Cheng, Xueqi, Lu Feier, and Yin Mengfan, who had stayed for the time being. There were more than a dozen people in total. Although the number of people wasn't small, it was much quieter compared to the situation where the upper and lower floors were filled with people. Li Yundong looked around and saw that after everyone had left, there were leftover fruit peels and shells everywhere on the ground. The teacups on the tea table were messy, and the scene was a mess. Li Yundong clapped his hands to attract everyone's attention. He smiled and said, Well, the opening ceremony is finally over. Let's clean up later. Maybe there will be more guests coming later. After he finished speaking, Zi Yuan took the lead to clean up the teacups on the table. As soon as she moved, Ruan Hongling followed suit. Su Chan also followed suit. Then, everyone in the Fox Zen School began to move. Feng Na and Cheng Cheng smiled and said, Let's help too. At this time, only Xueqi, Yin Mengfan, and Lu Feier were left sitting at the table with nothing to do. Xueqi said awkwardly, I'll help too. Li Yundong smiled and said, Forget it, President Chao. Just sit down. You are a guest. How can you be so busy? Xueqi smiled and didn't insist. Lu Feier, who was standing to one side, had been curiously looking at Li Yunyang's belly. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, Immortal Li, can I ask you a question? Li Yundong smiled and said, Okay, but if you ask me where I hid the jar of water, then you'd better not speak. Lu Feier's thoughts were exposed. She immediately said angrily, You're so annoying. How do you know what I'm going to ask? Li Yundong laughed heartily. You've been staring at my stomach all this time. If I still don't understand, then wouldn't I be stupid? Besides, you call me immortal. Of course I have to act like one. In the past, no matter where she went, Lu Feier had always been held in high regard. No matter how outstanding and proud a man was, he had to be polite to her. Li Yundong, on the other hand, had ignored her and even made fun of her. It was really unbearable. Uncle could not bear it, but Aunt could not bear it. Lu Feier was angry and said, Do you know everything? Li Yundong had defeated Zhang Ling, and the opening ceremony had been unprecedentedly lively and successful. He was in a good mood. Shaking his head, he said with a smile, I wouldn't dare. But I know everything about astronomy and English. I know the origin of civilization for 5,000 years, and I know 22 years from now. Li's words, Feng, Chao and Ian Fei, Luer and Feier, Feng, Li Yundong, Feng and Fu and Net, Li Yundong, Yang, Li Net, Fei Li and Lian Qing. Fei Li Yang Li. Do you understand? Li Yundong quickly glanced at Chao Yi and the others. Lu Feier's words made the expressions of Chao Yi and the others change. They all turned their heads, their expressions a little unnatural. He felt strange in his heart, but he asked with a smile, Sherba Chao Yi, do you think President Chao looks familiar? Chao Yi smiled and said, Leader is right. When I saw President Chao, I felt that she looked like someone. Zhuang Yiting, who was standing to one side, also smiled and said, I felt the same way. That's why I kept staring at her. It was rude of me. I hope President Chao doesn't mind. Xueqi smiled and said, Do I look like your friend? At this time, Lu Yuehong said, When I looked at President Chao, I felt a sense of déjà vu at this time. Su Chan also echoed, Yes, when I first saw President Chao, I also felt the same way. The little foxes of the Fox Zen School also echoed in unison. Yes, so do we. Xueqi was shocked. She unconsciously touched her face and said with a smile, Really? Who do I look like? Su Chan shook her head and said, I don't know, but I just feel that you look very familiar. At this time, Li Yundong also smiled and said, Sherba Chao Yi, you and President Chao both have the same surname. Are you a family? Chao Yi chuckled and said, 1,000 years ago, we were probably a family. After that, they laughed together. Lu Feier took Xueqi's arm and winked at her. How about it, Sister Chao? I found you a relative. Why don't you thank me? Xueqi smiled and said, How can I thank you? How about I take you on a 10-day trip to Sanya in Hainan? Lu Feier's face suddenly fell. Do you want to throw me back into the crew? Humph, no way. Anyway, wherever you go, I will follow you. Don't even think about leaving me behind. If you want to die, let's die together. Xueqi laughed and scolded. Bah, it's a good opening. What are you talking about? Lu Feier also realized that she had said something wrong. She gently patted her mouth and then said to Li Yundong with a smile, Immortal Li, I'll punish myself by drinking 3 cups. As she said this, she picked up the small teacup in front of her and drank 3 cups in a row. Li Yundong gave her a thumbs up and said with a smile, You have a great appetite. Lu Feier giggled and pretended to be generous. You flatter me. The two of them laughed, and the grudge between them disappeared. After Lu Feier sat down, she whispered to Xueqi, Sister Chao, this person is very interesting. He is capable and interesting. He is much more fun than the guys in our circle. Xueqi squinted at her and said with a faint smile, What's wrong? Have you fallen for him? Lu Feier snorted and said, No, there are so many beautiful women around him. How could it be my turn? As she said this, she pointed to Zi Yuan, who had walked up to Li Yundong, and said, Look at this. This is simply the 7 fairies descending to earth. She has such a good temperament, is so beautiful, and is actually so virtuous. Is this Li Yundong the reincarnation of Dong Yong? Xueqi also looked at Zi Yuan with jealousy. She did not speak for a long time, and after a long time, she sighed softly. At this time, Zi Yuan whispered to Li Yundong in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Li Yundong, have you found anything strange? The smile on Li Yundong's face didn't change, but he said, I found a little, but I don't know if it's the same as what you found. Zi Yuan said in a low voice. Did you notice that Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting said that Xueqi looked like someone they knew? However, Lu Yuehong and Su Chan said that Xueqi was very familiar, but they couldn't tell who she looked like. Don't you think it's a little strange? Li Yundong whispered, It's a little strange, but it doesn't mean anything. What I'm curious about is why Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting's statements are the same. Zi Yuan thought for a while and said, I don't know. We'll just pay more attention. Li Yundong said, Well, I'll keep an eye on it. However, the most important thing right now is to get Desanxian on the right track. After we solve the problem of making money, we can talk about other things. Zi Yuan smiled and said, Today is a good start. I believe that the business of Desanxian will not be a problem. Li Yundong nodded and said, I'm also confident. The two of them whispered for a while. During this time, Feng Na, Cheng Cheng, and the people of the Fox Zen school had already cleaned up the upstairs and downstairs. Feng Na saw Li Yundong standing to one side and talking to Zi Yuan, so she said with a smile, "Li Yundong, are you really an immortal? An idle immortal, or simply an idler for short?" Only then did Li Yundong realize that they had finished their work. He laughed and said, "Is it all done? Well, let's get ready to open for business later." As he spoke, Li Yundong walked to the middle of the first floor of the tea house. With one hand on his waist and the other waving, he said energetically, "Comrades, today's opening ceremony of Desanxian is grand, successful, perfect, and victorious. On behalf of the chairman of Desanxian International Company, Limited and all the employees, I would like to express my sincere condolences to everyone for their hard work." When he said these words, everyone kept chuckling. Seeing that the opening ceremony of Li Yundong's tea house was so successful, Su Chan beamed with joy and was the first to take the lead in applauding. The little foxes immediately followed suit. Feng Na and Cheng Ching also laughed and said loudly, "It's not hard on us. The leader has worked hard." Li Yundong was happy. He also pretended to stretch out his hand like a leader, pressed it down and said, "Well, although the leader has worked hard, the comrades have worked harder." Seeing that Li Yundong was making fun of them, everyone laughed in unison. Xueqi saw Lu Feier holding her cheeks and looking at Su Chan and the others with envy in her eyes. She said softly, "Are you jealous?" Lu Feier said softly, "Well, this person is so fun. I envy them so much. They must live happily every day, unlike me, who has to run around all day and struggle for fame and fortune. Alas, this kind of life may seem very glamorous to others, but in fact, it's boring." Li Yundong didn't know what Xueqi and Lu Feier were saying. He continued to say seriously, "In view of everyone's good performance today, I have decided to reward you well after today." As soon as he finished speaking, the little foxes raised their hands at the same time and laughed loudly. "Long live the leader." Su Chan's eyes lit up and she asked, "Are you going out to eat and drink?" The little foxes also asked at once, "Are you going out to buy new clothes? Can I buy a new bag? I want to buy a pair of new shoes." Li Yundong was angry when he heard this. He quickly stretched out his hands and pretended to be angry. "Be asterisk starred, you haven't earned a penny yet, and you're already thinking about how to squander money. How can you do that?" Ruan Hongling also joined in and said, "Li Yundong, you just said that you would reward us. Now you're going back on your word. Isn't that too unkind?" The little foxes said in unison, "That's right, it's too unkind." Their crisp shouts made the passers-by outside the shop look in one after another, their eyes full of envy and jealousy. Li Yundong was a little overwhelmed. He turned his head to look at Zi Yuan and glared at her. "Hey, you're also a major shareholder. At least say something." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "What major shareholder? Aren't you afraid of being laughed at in front of President Chow and President Yin? Besides, you said it yourself just now. Don't look at me." Li Yundong said with an exaggerated expression, "You actually defected to the enemy at the last minute. Are you kidding me?" Su Chan and the others burst out laughing. At this time, Zhou Qin also came back. As soon as Li Yundong saw her, he immediately said, "Zhou Qin, you came at the right time. Now that we haven't earned a penny, these girls are thinking about eating and drinking. They even want to buy clothes and bags. Don't you think it's too much?" Zhou Qin was suddenly amused. She said with a smile, "Too much, too much. How can they think about eating, drinking, and wearing clothes when they haven't earned a penny?" Li Yundong was overjoyed and said proudly to the little foxes, "Did you hear that? This is what an experienced strategist would say." Zhou Qin rolled her eyes and said with a smile, "However, when we make money today, we can go eat, drink, and wear clothes again. For eating, we should go to Shangri-La. For dressing, we should go to Chanel V. For dressing, we should go to Cartier Tiffany." Li Yundong gasped when he heard this. "Wow, they're all from the world's top brands. Are you trying to make me go bankrupt?" As he said this, he walked over to Xueqi's table, stretched out his hand, and said, "President Chow, can I borrow your eyebrow pencil?" Xueqi was covering her mouth and snickering. When she saw Li Yundong asking for an eyebrow pencil, she picked up her small bag, rummaged through the makeup bag, and took out an eyebrow pencil. She smiled and said, What do you want this for? Li Yundong said angrily. Just give it to me quickly. When he took the eyebrow pencil, he faced the crowd and used it to draw the position of the 5 internal organs on the clothes. He said with a roguish expression, "How much do you think I can sell for? You can go and spend as much as you think I can. I can also make a contribution to the GP exhibition of our motherland. How about that?" When everyone saw that Li Yundong was acting like a scoundrel, without the slightest immortal demeanor from before, they all laughed. Zi Yuan laughed and scolded. "Look at you. What's the difference between you and a hooligan?" Li Yundong was done joking. He smiled and threw the eyebrow pencil back to Xueqi, who was laughing so hard that she was lying on the table. He said, "Forget it, let's stop joking. Let's get to work. If business is good today, I'll treat everyone to delicious food and drinks." Su Chan and the little foxes immediately cheered in unison. "Hooray! We'll have delicious food and drinks." Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, whispered, "Master, don't you know how much they can eat? Aren't you afraid of going broke?" Li Yundong said with a straight face, "Let's go to the buffet. I'm happy today, so I don't care about my old face anymore." Zhou Qin suddenly burst out laughing. "You shameless girl, but I do." "I won't go." Li Yundong scolded her with a smile. "You stinky girl, you're my disciple. Not only did you complain, but you also took the lead in singing the opposite tune. Come on, go do your work. There will be no guests later. I'll see how happy you are." Zhou Qin snorted and said, "Ba ba, you jinx. There will be a lot of customers later." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Thank you for your kind words." The group of people had enough of the war of words, and they had all finished the opening celebration. At this time, they slowly settled down and prepared to do business. However, after waiting in the shop for a while, Li Yundong and the others saw a bustling crowd outside. There were a lot of people coming in, but no one came in to drink tea. What made Li Yundong even more puzzled was that until the afternoon, not a single customer came in. A few people wanted to come in to drink tea, but after taking a look inside, they immediately turned their heads and left in a hurry, as if the room was full of monsters. However, a few people went in to drink tea at Zhao's tea house, which made Zhao Yuzhen, who had been in a daze, come back to his senses. Li Yundong was puzzled and asked, "Is this salted fish going to turn over? Why is there no one in our shop?" Zi Yuan frowned slightly and remained silent. Su Chan and the others also looked at each other, confused. Why was there no one in her shop, but there were people in Zhao Yogan's shop opposite? What was the reason? Children, it's New Year's Eve. Happy New Year. I wish all my readers a Happy New Year. May everything go well in the new year. Haha. Chapter 421. Go to see Net. Li Yundong and the others were still immersed in the successful and warm opening ceremony, but they hadn't expected that they would soon be greeted by a scene of sparrows at the door. Go to see Net. Although there were also officials of Tiannan City who had heard the news and come to congratulate them, these people were not guests. After giving gifts, they turned around and left. Li Yundong frowned and said, "What's going on? Why are there no guests?" He looked at Zi Yuan and asked, "What happened?" Zi Yuan thought for a moment and shook her head. "I don't know yet." Li Yundong looked at Zhou Qin again and asked, "Miss Zhou, do you know?" She shook her head and comforted him, "Master, don't worry. There's no hurry to do business." Li Yundong laughed and said, "You're right, but there shouldn't be no guests at all, right? On the first day of the opening, there are many celebrities from all walks of life, but there isn't a single guest. What's going on?" Lu Feier suddenly raised her hand and said loudly, "Who said there are no guests? Am I not human? Waiter, hurry up and serve tea." Li Yundong turned his face and said to Su Chan with a smile, "I'm calling you. Hurry up and serve tea." She gracefully came to Xueqi's table and asked with a sweet smile, "Sisters, what kind of tea would you like?" Lu Feier wanted to tease Li Yundong, so she deliberately said with a straight face, "You are not the waiter. Let the waiter pour tea." Su Chan blinked and looked back at Li Yundong. Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed. It turned out that this girl was still holding a grudge. He snorted and said, "There is no waiter here." Xueqi secretly kicked Lu Feier under the table and whispered with a smile, "Hey, don't make trouble. Lu Feier deliberately pretended not to notice. She still raised her face and said leisurely, "Well, no one here knows why business is bad. I'm the only one who knows. It's really embarrassing." Hearing this, Li Yundong immediately trotted over to Lu Feier, bowed, and said with a smile, "Sir, the waiter is here. What would you like to drink?" Everyone burst into laughter. Guan Hongling laughed and scolded, "You're the store manager. How embarrassing." Li Yundong turned his face and said with a fierce face, "What nonsense are you talking about? I'm working hard to make money for you prodigals, aren't I?" After that, he turned his head and said with a face full of smiles, "Sir, don't pay attention to this kind of person. What would you like to drink? I'll prepare it for you right away." Lu Feier tried hard to hold back her laughter. She thought for a moment and said, "I want to drink oolong tea." Li Yundong laughed and said proudly, "We have Da Hong Pao, Tai Luohan, White Cockscomb, Water Gold Turtle, and Wui Cinnamon here. These are all oolong teas. Which one do you want?" Lu Feier opened her mouth and said in surprise, "You have Wui Da Hong Pao here? This is good tea." Li Yundong glanced at Zi Yuan and said with a smile, "This is all her credit. I don't dare to take credit for it." Lu Feier rolled her eyes and said seriously, "Well, I want to drink the oolong tea in the market." Li Yundong's smile froze, and he thought to himself, "This girl is playing with me." Chow Kefi, who was standing to one side, smiled and tried to smooth things over. "Well, stop fooling around. Hurry up and tell us." Yin Mengfan also smiled and said, "Yes, it's not a good sign to not open for business on the first day." Lu Feier giggled and said, "Do you want to know why no one is coming?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Big star, don't keep us guessing." Lu Feier giggled and said, "Because you just said that there would be no guests, so now it has come true." Su Chan and the others immediately burst out laughing. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Am I such a jinx?" Su Chan giggled and said, "Yundong, who told you to say that I have a jinx?" The other little foxes also joined in. "That's right." Li Yundong was a little annoyed. Just as he was smiling bitterly, he heard an old woman's voice coming from the door. "Hey, it's really here. Has everyone left? Little magic doctor, I'm late. I'm sorry." Li Yundong looked back and saw an old lady standing at the door. She was wearing a blue cotton-padded jacket with a white bottom and a pair of black cloth shoes. The old lady was hale and hearty, smiling, and holding a gift basket in her hand. She was Old Lady Su, who Li Yundong had once cured her chronic illness and helped Li Yundong settle his appearance. Who else could it be? Li Yundong immediately smiled and said, "Oh, it's Old Lady Su. Please come in." Zhou Qin also welcomed Old Lady Su into the tea house with a smile and said, "Grandma Su, why did you only arrive in the afternoon?" Old Lady Su smiled and said, "Not at all. I came in the morning, but when I saw so many official cars parked here, and all of them were quite powerful, I didn't want to get involved. So I went back and thought I would come back in the afternoon." As she said this, Old Lady Su smiled at Li Yundong and said, "Little magic doctor, you really hide your strength well. I didn't know that you were such a powerful character. Even the #1 car of the provincial party committee is here. Amazing." Li Yundong pointed to Zhou Qin with a smile and said, "This is because of her. I don't have the ability to disturb such a great god." Old Lady Su took Zhou Qin's hand and said with a smile, "I knew that your daughter was not an ordinary person. She must be the daughter of a rich family. Her speech and behavior are different from ordinary people. Now it seems that she is indeed not ordinary, haha." Zhou Qin smiled and pulled Old Lady Su to sit down. She smiled and said, "Grandma Su, please sit. What tea would you like to drink?" Old Lady Su waved her hand and said with a smile, "I won't sit. I have to go to the opera later." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Old Lady Su, since you came in, let's have a drink. At least let me open my shop." After he said this, the people around him laughed softly. Old Lady Su asked curiously, "What's wrong? No one came to drink tea?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Yes, I don't know why." Old Lady Su slapped her thigh and said with a smile, "Don't you know why? Hey, your shop is too luxurious and classy. Moreover, with so many high-ranking officials and dignitaries coming in this morning, who would dare to come in? What's more? Old Lady Su pointed from Zhou Qin to Su Chan, then to Zi Yuan, one by one, and finally to Lu Feier, Feng Na, and the others. She said with a smile, "Look at your place. Who in this room is not a great beauty? Although your tea house is small, there are many immortals here. How dare ordinary people come in to drink tea?" Hearing this, Li Yundong said with a strange expression, "Nowadays, isn't there a beauty effect in eyeball economy? Why is it not good to have too many beautiful women?" Old Lady Su couldn't stop smiling. She said, "But you have too many. Let me count 1, 2, 3. Oh my God! There are 18 beautiful women who are as beautiful as flowers and jade. With so many beautiful women, which ordinary person's legs won't tremble when they come in? They will think, my God, there are so many beautiful women. How much does it cost to have a cup of tea in this shop? I can't afford it. I definitely can't afford it." Old Lady Su's words dispelled all the doubts in Li Yundong's heart. He raised his head and laughed. He clapped his hands and said, "It's true that the onlookers see the game more clearly than the onlookers." Li Yundong smiled and said to Zi Yuan, "As a living immortal, you didn't expect things to be like this, did you?" Zi Yuan pursed her lips and said with a smile, "Indeed, the older, the wiser." Old Lady Su smiled and said, "I won't sit. Little magic doctor, I wish you a lot of money and a prosperous business. I'll bring some friends to your place for tea some other day. You have to give me a discount." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Okay, sure. Li Yundong sent Old Lady Su away with a smile. He turned around and thought for a moment, then simply waved his hand and said, "Forget it, let's not bother about it today. The opening ceremony is already lively enough. We can't expect to make a lot of money on the first day, right? Let's go. Let's call it a day." Lu Feier whispered to Xueqi, "How can he do business like this in the world? Call it a day in the afternoon?" Xueqi also smiled and said, "How can there be an actor like you in the world? You disappeared while acting?" Lu Feier said angrily, "Sister Chow, are you helping me or him?" Yin Mengfan, who had been silent all this time, suddenly smiled and said, "Of course, I value my lover more than my friend. Didn't you see that after she came, she didn't even talk to me? She just stared at her dream lover." Xueqi's cheeks turned crimson and she glared at them angrily. "Hey, what are you two talking about? Be careful, or I'll get angry." Yin Mengfan picked up her small bag and said with a smile, "I've been sitting with you all day. Forget it, I'll go first." She got up gracefully and came to Zhou Qin's side, saying with a smile, "Zhou Qin, I'll go back first. Look for me when you have time in the future. I'll be right there." Zhou Qin smiled slightly and said to Li Yundong, "Master, I'll see her off." Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, "Yes, you should. Today, Mr. Yin gave us a good start." Hearing this, Yin Mingfan's heart skipped a beat. She smiled and said, "In that case, I'll ask Childly for a favor some other day." "You can't refuse." Li Yundong saw that she had changed to call him Childly. It was obvious that today's battle had shocked her a lot. He sighed in his heart at the power of power and said with a smile, "If there's anything you need help with, just let me know." Yin Mengfan smiled and said, "That's a deal." After that, she walked out with Zhou Qin. Xueqi, who was in the shop, also stood up and looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes. She said, "Hey, we're leaving too. We'll come back for tea another day." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Okay, thank you for coming here today." Lu Feier, who was standing to one side, suddenly smiled and said, "Sister Chow was filming in Hainan. When she heard the news that you were going to open a shop, she immediately flew back." Xueqi immediately glared at Lu Feier, and her ears turned red. She glared at Li Yundong and said, "Who told this B***stod not to tell me the news?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Are you going back today?" Lu Feier said quickly, "No, we're staying at the Dihao Hotel today. Would you like to come and play? Sister Chow misses you so much." Xueqi covered her mouth angrily and shouted in a low voice, "Will you die if you don't speak?" As she said this, she pulled Lu Feier out, not daring to look at Li Yundong again. Li Yundong looked over and saw that Xueqi's neck was completely red. As Lu Feier struggled, she turned her head and said with a cheeky smile, "Hey, Immortal Li, you have to come. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he watched the two of them leave. When he turned around, he saw Su-chan looking at him suspiciously. Her eyes were rolling, and the others also had ambiguous looks in their eyes. Li Yundong said angrily, "Why are you looking at me? I'm innocent." Guan Hongling dragged out her voice and said meaningfully, "Oh, you are innocent. Well, I believe that you used to be innocent." Li Yundong said angrily, "What do you mean I used to be innocent? I've always been innocent." Li Yundong turned his head and said to the little foxes, "Hey, hurry up and say something fair." The little foxes immediately said, "Leader, we believe that you are innocent. You are innocent." Li Yundong looked at them with a strange expression. "Why do I feel that you are being sarcastic?" Guan Hongling chuckled and said in a strange tone, "You have a guilty conscience." Li Yundong couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. Su-chan, who was beside him, suddenly took his arm with a smile and said in a coquettish voice, "Yundong, I believe that you are innocent." Hearing this, Li Yundong's heart warmed. He smiled and said, "My girl is so obedient." "Humph, girl, I'll take you to eat and drink tonight. I won't take the others to play." As he said this, he held the little girl in his arms and walked out of the door. Guan Hongling was stunned and quickly shouted, "Hey, what about the store?" Li Yundong didn't even look back. "Do as you see fit." Guan Hongling stamped her feet and said, "D*it, this person is so annoying. He's actually a hands-off shopkeeper. Sister Ziyuan, what should we do?" Ziyuan smiled and turned to walk out the door leisurely. "Do as you see fit." Guan Hongling was dumbfounded. She looked at her Shiji and thought to herself, "Am I seeing things? When did Sister Ziyuan learn to be a rascal? Could it be that she is influenced by the company she keeps?" She hurriedly chased after them, leaving the people of the Fox Zen School looking at each other in dismay. At this time, Xueqi came back. She looked at Li Yundong's back and asked curiously, "Where are they going?" At this time, the little foxes and the three sherbas were also enlightened and ran out one after another. Only Xueqi was left shouting in confusion, "Hey, where are you going? Hey, say something. Hey, you don't even want the store?" Xueqi was so angry that she stamped her feet, quickly locked the door, and quickly chased after them. After eating and drinking outside, the group finally returned home. After Li Yundong returned to his room, he meditated and cleared his mind for a while, then began to think about some of the things that had happened that day. What puzzled him the most was that when he and Zhongling were fighting in the air, why had they attracted the heavenly thunder? Logically speaking, there was no cloud in the sky at that time, so it shouldn't have attracted the heavenly thunder. Could it be that someone was coveting it? If so, who could it be? Moreover, if the heavenly thunder was attracted by someone, why didn't it strike at the beginning? Could it be a deterrent to make me and Zhongling stop? These questions came one after another, making Li Yundong feel as if he had fallen into a cloud of 800 miles. He sighed softly and said, "Yes, yes." While he was perplexed and confused, he heard someone knocking on his door. Li Yundong said in a deep voice, "Please come in." The door creaked, and a woman came in. She was tall and beautiful. It was Zhuang Yuting, the third sherbwa of the Fox Zen School. Li Yundong was stunned and asked curiously, "Third sherbwa, what's the matter?" Zhuang Yuting's face was surprisingly serious. She said, "Leader, I have something very important to tell you." Li Yundong smiled and said, "What's so important that you can't tell me tomorrow?" Zhuang Yuting shook her head and said, "Leader, I know who the traitor is in our Fox Zen School. == Happy Year of the Rabbit, everyone, haha. Chapter 422. Go to watch net. Hearing Zhuang Yuting's words, Li Yundong was shocked. He immediately stood up, but soon sat down slowly and said calmly, "Oh? How do you know that there is a traitor in the Fox Zen School?" Zhuang Yuting looked worried. She sighed softly and said, "Leader, do you think I can't see it? I actually heard what you whispered to Zhenren Ziyuan in private. At that time, I kept an eye on it, but I didn't dare to confirm it, so I didn't tell Leader. Go to watch net. 7K. M. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Do you know that Ziyuan and I are also suspecting you?" Zhuang Yuting nodded and said, "Yes. That's why I have to prove my innocence. Li Yundong asked. How can you prove your innocence? Zhuang Yuting said in a low voice. Leader, you just need to go to Chao Yi's room and you'll know. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He stood up and said in a low voice. What's wrong with Chao Yi's room? Take me there. Just as he was about to go out, he suddenly heard his cell phone ring loudly. Ever since Feng Na had mentioned him, Li Yundong had brought his cell phone with him again. He picked it up and saw that it was a call from Xueqi. Li Yundong felt a little strange. He pressed the answer button and immediately heard a woman shouting in panic. Li Yundong, is that Li Yundong? Li Yundong could hear that the woman's voice was so frightened that it was a little hoarse. He asked in a low voice, Who are you? The woman shouted, I'm Lu Feier. Li Yundong, come and help me. Sister Chao has been killed. Li Yundong was shocked. He quickly asked, What's going on? Don't worry. What's the matter? Lu Feier choked with sobs and said, Someone wants to kill Sister Chao. Come quickly. Sister Chao is dying. Li Yundong was about to ask for the room number when he heard the beeping sound of the phone being hung up. Li Yundong was shocked and couldn't care less about Zhuang Yuting. He hurried out of the room, went to the balcony, and shouted to the balcony next to him. Ziyuan, Ziyuan. When Ziyuan heard the noise, she rushed over from the balcony and asked curiously, What happened? Why are you in such a hurry? Li Yundong said anxiously, Someone wants to kill Xueqi. I'll go and have a look. Call everyone together and tell them not to move around. Ziyuan was shocked, but she quickly calmed down and nodded. Don't worry, I'll be here. Li Yundong nodded. He glanced at Zhuang Yuting and said, We'll talk about this when we get back. With that, he flew into the air and turned into a ray of green light, flying toward the Imperial Hotel. After Li Yundong left, Su Chan also came to the living room in her pajamas. She asked curiously, Sister Ziyuan, what happened? Ziyuan smiled faintly and said, It's nothing. Li Yundong has something to do. Call everyone together first. Although Su Chan was puzzled, she still knocked on the door one by one and called everyone in the Fox Sen school. When she came to Chao Yi's room and knocked on the door for a while, there was no movement inside. Su Chan asked curiously, Strange, is Chao Yi Sherbua not here? Zhuang Yuting suddenly sneered and said, It would be strange if she was here. Su Chan blinked and asked, Zhuang Yuting Sherbua, how do you know that Chao Yi Sherbua is not here? Zhuang Yuting snorted coldly and didn't say anything. Su Chan rolled her eyes. She thought for a moment and was about to knock on the door again, but as soon as she raised her hand, the door creaked open. Chao Yi, wearing a loose Taoist robe, came out and asked with a strange look on her face, What's wrong? What's the matter? Su Chan smiled and said, Chao Yi Sherbua, you're here? Third Sherbua said you weren't here. Chao Yi quickly glanced at Zhuang Yuting and said with a smile, Third Sherbua probably thought I went out. Su Chan smiled and said, Where can you go so late? Chao Yi smiled slightly and said, By the way, it's so late. What's the matter? Su Chan said, Leader said that we should all stay in the living room together. Chao Yi asked curiously, What happened? Su Chan shook her head and said, I don't know. I only heard him say that. Chao Yi nodded and said, Since Leader has instructed me, I will naturally do as he says. With that, she went downstairs with a smile. When Chao Yi passed by, Su Chan's nose suddenly twitched slightly and she sniffed. The little girl suddenly thought to herself, Strange, why is there a smell of blood on 6th Sherbua? The little girl felt strange in her heart and unconsciously chased after Chao Yi for 2 steps, trying to determine whether the smell was real or not. As soon as she chased after her, Chao Yi immediately turned around and looked at her suspiciously. Chaner, what's wrong with you? Su Chan was keenly aware of Chao Yi's abnormal sensitivity at this moment. She immediately smiled and said, It's nothing. I'll go to the other side and call the other Shiji. As she said this, she quickly walked past Chao Yi. As she passed by, she sniffed again and smelled a faint smell of blood. Su Chan was extremely proud of her sense of smell. She knew that it was impossible for her to smell wrong twice in a row. She was shocked and thought to herself, Where did the smell of blood on Chao Yi Sherbua come from? While Su Chan was making wild guesses, Li Yundong had already arrived at the Dihao Hotel. He didn't wait for him to get close to the hotel. Instead, He picked a place where there was no one around and landed. Then, he rushed toward the entrance of the hotel. Along the way, Li Yundong was secretly anxious. He knew that Xueqi had done him a favor. It was somewhat unjustifiable that he had disappeared without saying a word. He felt a little guilty in his heart, so his pace became faster and faster. Gradually, he was like a galloping horse. Especially when he was crossing the road, he didn't even look at the speeding cars on both sides. Like a spirit monkey, he jumped from one end of the road to the other in just a few leaps. Li Yundong jumped easily, but the drivers were unlucky. They saw a figure fly over their car with a few flashes. It was so agile that it didn't look like a human being. They were shocked and turned their heads to look at the person. In the blink of an eye, the road was filled with people chasing after him. After a while, the road was completely blocked. Li Yundong couldn't care less about the movement behind him. He dialed Xueqi's number to ask for the specific room number, while he rushed into the hotel quickly. The security guard in the hotel, who was wearing a white shirt and black trousers, saw Li Yundong's nervous expression and hurried footsteps. He was secretly suspicious. Immediately, one of them came up and asked, "Sir, please wait. Please show me your ID." Li Yundong held the phone in one hand and touched it with the other. He was immediately stunned and said, "I didn't bring it." The security guard said in a deep voice, "Then you can't go in." Li Yundong took the phone and said to the security guard, "Something happened to my friend. If you don't believe me, you can listen to it." The security guard looked at him suspiciously. He took the phone and listened for a while, but soon returned it to him and said, "It's busy." Li Yundong was anxious. "I just dialed it. What's going on?" "Hello, something happened to my friend." The security guard shook his head and said stubbornly, "No, you can't go in." Li Yundong was annoyed. Saving people is like putting out a fire. "Are you going to let me in or not?" The security guard sneered and said, "What happened?" "I'll go and save her. But you can't go in." Li Yundong said angrily, "If I knew where she was, I wouldn't talk nonsense with you." After that he pushed the security guard and said angrily, "Get out of my way." Li Yundong's strength was actually comparable to that of an ordinary person. With his push, the security guard suddenly flew out. The security guards on both sides of the hall saw that the situation was not good. They immediately called the police, drew their batons, and surrounded Li Yundong from all directions. Li Yundong snorted angrily and went straight to the front desk. On the way, the security guards who approached him raised their hands and flew out without saying a word. The guests in the hall saw that these powerful security guards were immediately thrown out as soon as they got close to Li Yundong. The farthest one flew more than 10 meters away as if he was on a plane. They were all stunned and stood where they were, dumbfounded. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly, for fear that they would provoke this devil and make him come to them. That would be very bad. The lady at the front desk was desperately pressing the alarm bell under the counter with one hand and holding it tightly with the other. Her body kept shaking, but she still kept a strange professional smile on her face. Li Yundong rushed to the front desk and saw that the poor girl was so scared that she couldn't even stand steadily. He was stunned for a moment, but his expression soon eased a little. He asked in a low voice, "Is there a person named Xueqi staying in your hotel?" Seeing that Li Yundong's expression had eased, the lady at the front desk also subconsciously relaxed a little. She thought to herself, "This man is quite handsome, but I'm afraid he's here to seek revenge. He's not a good person." So she boldly shook her head and said, "No, no." Li Yundong suddenly became furious. "You didn't even check and you said no? What the hell? She just called and said that she was here. Hurry up and check. Tell me as soon as you find out." Li Yundong's roar made even cultivators have to be in awe, let alone this young and beautiful lady at the front desk. The lady at the front desk suddenly shivered all over, and her hands quickly flew over the keyboard. While she was searching, she saw a security guard behind Li Yundong boldly throw the electric baton in his hand at Li Yundong. Without looking back, Li Yundong grabbed the electric baton with his hand. As soon as he held the electric baton, the lady at the front desk and the security guard were overjoyed. They all knew that this electric baton could instantly release a high voltage of tens of thousands of volts, which could instantly make people tremble and lose their ability to move. But as soon as the smiles appeared on their faces, they suddenly froze. They saw Li Yundong holding the electric baton and staring at the security guard who had attacked him behind him. He didn't say a word, but he was not angry. The security guard was stunned for a moment. He thought that he had not pressed the switch, so he pressed the switch a few more times. He only heard the crackling sound of the electric baton, but Li Yundong did not move at all. He stared at him like an insulated stone man. Li Yundong was not in the mood to deal with these people. He suppressed his anger and shouted in a low voice, "Have you had enough?" The security guard immediately let go of the electric baton, raised his hands, and looked at Li Yundong with fear, as if he were looking at a devil. Li Yundong glared at him, slapped the baton on the front desk, and shouted, "Have you found it?" At this time, the smile on the lady at the front desk had not faded. Her expression was scared, and her smile became uglier than crying. She said in fear, "In room 35. Without saying a word, Li Yundong turned his head and ran upstairs. No one in the hall dared to stop him. A group of people looked at his figure in a daze, motionless. After Li Yundong left, the lady at the front desk picked up the electric baton and looked at it curiously. She pressed the switch and saw that the electric baton was still crackling. She muttered to herself, "Impossible, why didn't the electric shock hit him? Could it be a low-quality product?" Several of the ladies at the front desk, who were also frightened, came to their senses and said angrily, "It must be a low-quality product. Otherwise, how could he be fine after touching it?" The lady at the front desk who had answered Li Yundong tentatively touched the security guard who was holding the counter with the electric baton. As soon as the security guard's hand came into contact with the electric spark, he was immediately electrocuted and fell to the ground. He looked like a lunatic, foaming at the corner of his mouth. At this time, the ladies at the front desk came to their senses. It turned out that it was not that the electric baton was useless, but that the guy just now was not a human at all. Chapter 423. Go to Watch Network. Li Yundong didn't wait for the elevator to come down. He ran up the stairs by himself. In a short while, he rushed to the 19th floor. Before he could find Xueqi and Lu Feier's room, he shouted in the corridor, "President Chao, President Chao." "Lu Feier, where are you?" Li Yundong's shout alarmed the entire floor. Some curious people leaned out of the door and muttered to themselves, "Lu Feier? Is it that big star Lu Feier?" While they were guessing, they saw a door suddenly open, and a girl ran out. She was wearing a bathrobe and her hair was disheveled. She waved at Li Yundong with a panicked expression and shouted, "Li Yundong, I'm here. President Chao is dying. Come quickly." Li Yundong immediately rushed toward her and asked anxiously, "What's going on? Where's President Chao?" Lu Feier didn't care that she had been discovered. She pulled Li Yundong and pointed to the room. Her voice was filled with fear and a strong sob. She said, "I don't know what's going on. When I came out of the shower, Chao was like this." Li Yundong walked into the room and saw that it was a spacious and luxurious double room. The double room was equipped with all kinds of appliances, and it was also equipped with a bathroom and a balcony. 7K. Oath M. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the balcony were open, and the curtains fluttered gently in the night wind outside. The bedside lamp between the two beds was slightly lit, and the faint light outlined Xueqi's figure. She was lying on a bed, her eyes closed, her hands tightly covering her chest, and her face full of pain. Li Yundong rushed to her side and felt her pulse with his hand. He found that her pulse was extremely weak, almost as if it didn't exist. Li Yundong tried her breathing with his hand again and found that she was completely out of breath. Li Yundong's heart tightened. He asked in a deep voice, "Do you know that President Chao has heart disease?" Lu Feier saw that Li Yundong's expression was calm and composed. She was slightly relieved and said, "I know." Li Yundong asked, "Then why didn't you give her medicine?" Lu Feier said with tears in her eyes, "I did, but she couldn't swallow it. I gave her water, but it was useless." Li Yundong frowned. "Have you called 110 yet? Where's 120? Lu Feier wiped her tears and shook her head. "No, when I came out, Sister Chao was still conscious. I saw her clutching her chest in pain, so I thought she had a heart attack. I quickly found medicine for her. After I fed it to her, she struggled and said that someone wanted to kill her. She asked me to find you quickly and said that you could save her." Li Yundong frowned. He saw that there was not only a pool of water beside Xueqi, but also a few drops of blood not far away. He dipped one hand in the blood and sniffed it. He pressed Xueqi's pulse with the other hand and asked in a deep voice, "Did she say who wanted to kill her?" Lu Feier shook her head. "Did you see the murderer?" Li Yundong asked. Lu Feier shook her head desperately. Her eyes were full of fear, as if to say, "If I saw it, wouldn't I be lying here too?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and asked, "Do you have any enemies?" Lu Feier shook her head and said, "No." Li Yundong said, "Think about it. I mean some very special enemies like me, who have a little special ability." Lu Feier couldn't help but sob again. Sister Chow is usually kind to others. How could she have any enemies? Li Yundong asked, "But didn't I see someone collect a debt from her last time?" Lu Feier said, "Sister Chow has already paid off that debt." Li Yundong fell silent. He slowly transferred Yuanyang Qi to Xueqi's body, trying to help her hang on to the last breath of life. He asked again, "No, didn't you come back to Tiannan City in private? Who else knows your whereabouts?" Lu Feier said bitterly, "The crew may know that we returned to Tiannan City, but they shouldn't know where we live." Li Yundong frowned. He was about to ask again when he saw Lu Feier suddenly sob, "Hurry up and save President Chow." "Can you save her?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Don't worry, she's fine, but..." Li Yundong was about to tell her about Xueqi's current situation when he suddenly heard a noise coming from outside. "What? Lu Feier is here? Where? The tourists outside were alarmed. When some fans heard about Lu Feier's whereabouts, they immediately surrounded her and craned their heads to look around at the door. Some people pointed at Lu Feier's figure and shouted, "Yes, it's Lu Feier. Ah, Lu Feier, I love you. Lu Feier, give me an autograph. I love watching your movies and TV shows." Lu Feier had dealt with countless fans, but obviously, she had never dealt with her own fans in such a situation. She was stunned for a moment, at a loss, and didn't know what to do. If she agreed, they would destroy the scene if they came in. Moreover, how could she deal with these fanatical fans in such a situation? But if she didn't agree, if the matter got out, there would be unfavorable news and gossip about her. Lu Feier's face was dull. She stood like a clay puppet, watching the fans rush toward her like a tide. Just as she was about to be surrounded by these fans, Li Yundong suddenly shouted in a deep voice, "Stop." Although this low shout was not loud, it was full of majesty and power, causing these fans to stop in their tracks and stand still. They looked in the direction of the voice and saw a young man squatting by the bed, looking at them coldly, like a lion looking down at 100 beasts. His face was indifferent, and there was no expression on his face, but between his eyebrows, there was a natural pressure that came from not being angry. Li Yundong said angrily, "Someone is going to die here. Didn't you notice? Get out of here. If someone dies, will you be responsible?" Only then did these people come to their senses. They looked at the beautiful Xueqi lying on the bed, and then at the panicked Lu Feier. Finally, their eyes fell on the young and handsome Li Yundong. Countless imaginative stories suddenly appeared in their minds, and then countless erotic and ambiguous gossip and anecdotes emerged. Chinese people loved to join in on the fun. When these guys saw such a fascinating thing happening at this time, they immediately became excited. Although they didn't dare to go forward, they didn't retreat either. One by one, they piled up at the door and excitedly took pictures with their mobile phones. Li Yundong frowned and said to Lu Feier in a deep voice, "Drive them all out." Lu Feier was stunned and asked, What? Li Yundong glared at her and said, "Do you want President Chow to die? Hurry up and drive them all out." Lu Feier seemed to wake up from a dream. She begged the crowd, "Could you please make way? I'll definitely sign autographs for you later." These people all smiled and promised, but their feet seemed to be rooted to the ground and they didn't move at all. Lu Feier was so anxious that tears welled up in her eyes. She was about to speak again when she suddenly heard a woman shouting her name outside. Lu Feier was stunned and subconsciously shouted, "Sister Hong? I'm here." After a while, a tall woman wearing a black professional suit and a pair of black-rimmed glasses squeezed in from the crowd. The moment the woman saw Lu Feier, her face immediately revealed a strong expression of anger. However, she looked left and right, then forcefully suppressed her anger. She just walked up to Lu Feier and said in a low voice, "Feier, you've gone too far this time. How dare you sneak away from the crew? Do you know how bad the impact is? Now the whole crew is saying that you're acting like a big shot." When Lu Feier saw that the woman was her agent, Sister Hong, she immediately rushed over as if she had seen her savior. She took her hand and asked in surprise, "Sister Hong, how did you find me?" Seeing that she didn't answer her question, Sister Hong snorted coldly and temporarily put the previous matter behind her. "I have my own way. But where is Xueqi? How could she be such a B****starred? It's fine if she ran away by herself, but why did she drag you away? Where is she?" Lu Feier pointed at Xueqi, who was lying on the bed with a worried expression and said sadly, "Someone wants to kill Sister Chow. She's dying now." Sister Hong was shocked, but she still said rudely, "This woman is the best at causing trouble. Humph, this is her retribution." Lu Feier pulled her arm and whispered, "Sister Hong, don't say anything. I wanted to come out with Sister Chow. It's not her fault." Sister Hong glared at her and said, "You're still speaking for her." Lu Feier's tears were about to fall again. She choked and said, "Don't say anything. If you want to scold someone, scold me. It's all my fault that Sister Chow ended up like this." The anger between Sister Hong's eyebrows dissipated a little. She glanced at Li Yundong, who was concentrating on transferring Xueqi to Xueqi, and asked, "Who is this person?" Lu Feier whispered, "Sister Chow's friend." Sister Hong frowned. "What friend?" Lu Feier hesitated for a moment before saying, "Just an ordinary friend." Sister Hong asked, "Is he a doctor?" Lu Feier was tongue-tied. "I don't know." Sister Hong frowned. She said to Li Yundong, "Hey, are you a doctor?" Li Yundong didn't even turn his head as he said lightly no. Sister Hong suddenly said angrily, "If you're not a doctor, what are you doing here? Do you know that it will kill someone? When Xueqi really dies, who will be responsible for it? You or someone else? Hey, say something. Hurry up and get out of the way. If you're not a doctor, what are you doing? Hey. Li Yundong tilted his head slightly, glanced at the agent lightly, and said, "Then why don't you find someone else to treat her?" Hearing this, Sister Hong was stunned, but soon she became angry and said, "Who do you think you are? How dare you talk to me like this?" She quickly took out her mobile phone from her bag and said angrily to Lu Feier, "Did you call the ambulance?" Lu Feier was sandwiched in the middle. She looked at Li Yundong in a dilemma and then at her agent. She shook her head helplessly. Sister Hong glared at her fiercely. Just as she was about to make the call, she suddenly heard someone shouting outside, I'm a doctor, I'm a doctor." Sister Hong was overjoyed when she heard this. She shoved the phone into Lu Feier's hand and said quickly, "Hurry up and call the ambulance. Don't let this unknown guy make things worse. If we don't manage to save him, we'll all be in trouble." As she spoke, she quickly walked up to the crowd and shouted, "Who is the doctor?" At this time, a tall young man walked out of the crowd and said with a smile, "I'm a doctor." As he said this, he took out his certificate from his pocket and said, "This is my medical certificate." Sister Hong glanced at it and asked in surprise, "You graduated from Harvard University?" The young man quickly glanced at Lu Feier, then quickly hid his astonished eyes carefully. He said with a smile, "Yes, I'm a doctor of pharmacology and neurology at Harvard University. Now I'm working at North Carolina State Hospital. I know a little about medicine, so I think I can help." Sister Hong suddenly showed a big smile on her face. She giggled and said, "You only know a little about medicine? Haha, you're really modest, unlike some people who pretend to know what they don't know and cause trouble." As she said this, Sister Hong turned her head and glared at Li Yundong. The young man smiled and asked in a gentlemanly manner, "Can I go in and have a look?" The agent, Sister Hong, quickly made way for him and said with a smile, Of course. The young man walked to Li Yundong's side and unconsciously glanced at Lu Feier. He coughed and asked, "Hello, can I have a look? I'm a doctor, a professional doctor." Li Yundong looked up at him and asked lightly, "Do you know what's going on with her now? Is she alive or dead?" The young man suddenly became angry. He thought to himself, "You're obviously not a doctor. Why are you pretending? Is it possible that I, a double doctor who graduated from Harvard Medical School, am inferior to a Mongolian doctor like you? Who do you think you are? How dare you be so arrogant in front of me? You're really reciting filial piety in front of Confucius and playing tricks in front of Guan Yu. There were a lot of social engagements, so the update was late. Sorry. Chapter 424. Go to watch net. Li Yundong's casual words were meant to test the other party's medical skills, but for the proud and arrogant young returnee, he felt a little choked. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. He was so angry that he subconsciously wanted to refute, but as soon as the words were about to come out of his mouth, he became alert. He secretly glanced at Lu Feier and thought, this bastard has no manners. I'm a top student from Harvard University in the United States. I can't lower myself to his level. The young returnee straightened his clothes and asked with a polite smile on his face, if you don't let me see, how do I know if she's alive or dead? Beside him, his agent, Sister Hong, looked at him and secretly praised him. As expected of someone who has been educated abroad, he is really well educated. As she thought about it, she couldn't help but roll her eyes at Li Yundong and think to herself, unlike some Chinese people, they really have no manners. It clearly had nothing to do with him, yet he insisted on getting involved. Humph. Could it be that he didn't know that he was the one who got involved and lost his face? Li Yundong glanced at the young returnee and suddenly asked, what's your surname? There was a hint of arrogance and superiority in the young returnee's reserved manner. He was like a city man who had seen the world looking at a rustic country bumpkin. He said, my name is Howard D. Smith. Li Yundong smiled and said, well, Mr. Shi, since you are a doctor, come and have a look. The proud and reserved smile on Mr. Shi's face suddenly froze. He blurted out, it's Mr. Smith, not Mr. Shi. Li Yundong nodded with a smile and said, I know Mr. Shi. Lu Feier, who was standing to one side, saw Li Yundong teasing the fake foreigner. For some reason, she suddenly thought of Li Yundong's appearance as a waiter in the tea house and suddenly burst into laughter. When she smiled, both the fake foreigner and her agent, Sister Hong, looked at her in surprise, as if they didn't understand how she could still smile in such a situation. Lu Feier also realized that there was something wrong with her. She quickly turned her face away and lowered her head. Her face was tense, as if her mother had died, but her eyes kept slipping over to Li Yundong's face from time to time. Although she had been very scared and flustered, she found that Li Yundong had been very calm, especially in this situation. He could even make fun of this fake foreign devil with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. He must have a way, right? Even though she hadn't known Li Yundong for a long time, Lu Feier always felt that there was an inexplicable power in this boy that made her feel at ease. Mr. Shi was a little embarrassed by Lu Feier's sneer. He stared at Li Yundong unkindly and said, I'm a doctor. Let me see her condition. Li Yundong let go of one of Xueqi's hands and said, please. The fake foreigner frowned and said, I'm not a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. I don't know how to feel a pulse. Li Yundong looked at him strangely. Western medicine also feels the pulse on the wrist. Don't you know how to do it? The fake foreigner's face turned a little red. He glared at Li Yundong and reached out to touch the main artery on Xueqi's neck. After feeling it for a while, he suddenly exclaimed, God, she has no pulse. Li Yundong suddenly laughed. God, so you know how to feel a pulse. The fake foreigner said angrily, are you making fun of me? This person has no pulse. We need to do chest compressions and artificial respiration as soon as possible. The smile on Li Yundong's face slowly disappeared. He looked at the fake foreigner with a little sympathy and said, forget it, Mr. Shi. Let me do it. You can't do it. When the fake foreigner heard this, he immediately forgot his manners. He said angrily, what did you say? I can't do it? I have a double doctorate in medicine from Harvard University. What are you? Do you have a medical qualification? Do you know how to treat diseases and save people? This is a life, and you can't afford it. Get out of the way. If you don't know medicine, don't make trouble. The agent, Sister Hong, also said to Li Yundong with a cold face, hey you, get out of the way. Why can't you talk sense? Summer insects can't talk about ice. Do you know what medicine is? Do you know what's going on with Xueqi? She was born with heart disease. Get out of the way. If she really dies, you will have to bear criminal responsibility. The fake foreigner also threatened, if you don't get out of the way, you will be responsible for the safety of this person's life. You will spend the rest of your life in prison. Li Yundong glanced at him and sighed helplessly. You think you know it very well. But do you know what's going on with her? The fake foreigner sneered and said, Are you deaf? Didn't you hear that it's a heart attack? Heart disease needs to be treated as soon as possible, and the room needs to be ventilated. Now her heart has stopped beating. One more second of delay is a kind of murder. Li Yundong shook his head and said, No, she doesn't have a heart attack. The fake foreigner laughed and said, Then what is it? Li Yundong's hand still did not let go of Chao Kefi's wrist. He kept sending Yuan Yang qi into her body to maintain the vitality in her body. He said, I just found that Chao Kefi's innate soul is missing. Normal people have 3 souls and 7 spirits, but she only has 1 soul and 3 spirits. It is precisely because of the congenital lack of soul that she has a congenital lack of qi and blood, which leads to her heart disease. Furthermore, the rest of her soul has already been scattered by someone. Her soul is currently wandering outside, causing her physical body to have almost no life force. When Li Yundong said this, the agent, Sister Hong, and the fake foreigner couldn't help laughing. Sister Hong laughed and said, I'm dying of laughter. What era are we in? There are actually people who talk about such superstitious things. 3 souls and 7 spirits. What a joke. You don't know medicine, but you really don't know it. How dare you fool us with such things that can fool children? Hey, then tell me, which soul and 3 spirits does Chao Kefi have? Li Yundong didn't seem to notice Sister Hong's sarcasm and mockery. He said seriously, the 3 souls of a person are the heaven soul, the earth soul, and the life soul. There are 7 spirits. The first spirit is Tianchong, the second spirit is wisdom, the third spirit is qi, the fourth spirit is strength, the fifth spirit is the center, the sixth spirit is the essence, and the seventh spirit is the spirit. Among the 3 souls, Chao Kefi only had the life soul before. The heaven soul and the earth soul were not in her body. Among the 7 spirits, the qi, the power, the essence, the heroic, and the 4 spirits were not in her body. Sister Hong sneered and said, You actually said it so logically. It's a pity that summer insects can't talk about ice. I didn't know that you were so young, but why are you more superstitious than an old man? The fake foreigner couldn't help but sneer and say, Hey, are you still living in the Qing dynasty? Where's your braid? Li Yundong was furious in his heart. In the past, if Li Yundong had used all his strength to glare at the person in front of him, he would have been able to make his heart beat violently and make him spit out a mouthful of blood. But at this time, not only had Li Yundong's cultivation improved, but his temperament had also slowly been tempered. He just glanced at the fake foreigner lightly. Although it was just a faint glance, Li Yundong, who had experienced several battles and all kinds of hardships, had already cultivated a dignified aura. The fake foreigner's laughter was choked in his throat, and he didn't dare to say anything more. Li Yundong didn't bother to pay any more attention to him and the manager. He let go of Chao Kefi's wrist and placed his palm on the Bai Hui acupoint on the top of Chao Kefi's head. His other hand reached out and unbuttoned Chao Kefi's collar, revealing a large area of snow-white skin. Seeing this, Sister Hong couldn't help but ask angrily, What do you want to do? The fake foreigner looked at the attractive ravine on Chao Kefi's chest and couldn't help but feel a little dazzled for a moment. However, when he heard Sister Hong's scolding, he immediately came to his senses. He took a step forward and asked like a parrot, What are you doing? Li Yundong didn't look back. He snorted and said, Watch carefully. As he said this, all the zhenqi in his body rushed from his palm to Chao Kefi's body. His other hand was like a butterfly flying through flowers, and his 5 fingers quickly poked at various acupoints on Chao Kefi's chest. The fake foreigner wanted to step forward to stop Li Yundong, but he was shocked by Li Yundong's power and didn't dare to move forward. The same was true for Sister Hong. She turned her head and said angrily to Lu Feier in a low voice, Where did this man come from? How did he know you were here? Lu Feier was speechless. Seeing this, Sister Hong couldn't help but say angrily, Did you call him here? Seeing that she couldn't hide it anymore, Lu Feier bit her lip and nodded gently. Sister Hong suddenly went crazy and said angrily, How did you know such a person? Did Chao Kefi introduce you to him? Why did you think of calling him here? Lu Feier quickly explained, No, Sister Hong. It was President Chao who asked me to find him. Moreover, he is very powerful, really very powerful. I saw it with my own eyes. Sister Hong suddenly turned around, pointed at Li Yundong, and said angrily, is that so? Playing tricks like a witch? As she spoke, she saw Li Yundong's palm press on Chao Kefi's head. He didn't seem to exert much force, but Chao Kefi slowly stood up by herself. However, her eyes were still closed, her face was as thin as paper, and her skin was frighteningly pale, without a trace of blood. For a moment, Sister Hong was a little tongue-tied, and the people watching at the door also stirred. They whispered, hey, it's a little magical. F***CK, are you for real? What's going on? Is this a movie? Lu Feier also widened her eyes and looked at the scene in front of her with excitement. At this time, she was already convinced that this master, who had been praised by Chao Kefi, must be a powerful guy. He must be able to save Chao Kefi. Lu Feier couldn't help but take Sister Hong's hand and whisper excitedly. Sister Hong, look, look. I told you that he's amazing. Sister Hong couldn't help but say angrily, bullshit. This is not magic, this is superstition, this is pretending to be mysterious. She pointed at the people watching at the door and said loudly, tell me, do you believe it yourself? What era is this? Why are you still doing this? This kind of person will be sentenced if he is arrested. While she was talking loudly, Li Yundong suddenly shouted hum and ha in the room, followed by a third shout, Chao Kefi, the soul has returned. The soul has returned. In the blink of an eye, everyone saw that the curtain on the balcony was suddenly raised high, and Chao Kefi's body trembled violently. Not long after, Chao Kefi let out a groan, and her long eyelashes gently trembled as she slowly woke up. The crowd suddenly burst into an uproar. The fake foreigner was dumbfounded, and his eyeballs almost fell out. He couldn't understand how this woman, who had no pulse just now, could come back to life in the blink of an eye without any medical treatment. Sister Hong stared at Chao Kefi dumbfoundedly, unable to say a word. Li Yundong supported Chao Kefi with one hand and leaned her against the bed. Then he glanced at the fake foreigner faintly and said, I can understand that you, a foreigner in China's skin, don't understand all this. As he said this, he turned to look at Sister Hong and shook his head slightly. But as a Chinese, you blindly think that the things of our ancestors are dregs and superstitions. I can't understand this. Sister Hong's face suddenly became very ugly. She opened her mouth and was about to retort, but she heard Li Yundong sigh again. Alas, but you are right about one thing. Sister Hong asked subconsciously, what is it? Li Yundong said meaningfully, you can't talk about ice in summer. Children, I'm sorry, but the internet in my house is 7 to 9, and it automatically disconnects at 9 p.m. Last night, I forgot to update it, and it was already past 9 p.m., so I didn't have time to update the second chapter. Vote for recommendation, previous page. Next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 425. Go to Watch Network. Li Yundong's words made Sister Hong's face turn red. Her eyes were full of shame and anger, but she had no way to refute Li Yundong. After all, Chao Kefi, who had almost died before, had been saved by this young man in the blink of an eye. After all, no matter how eloquent she was, she couldn't defeat the hard facts. Go to see. 7K. Oath M. On the other hand, the fake foreign devil was very unconvinced and snorted. What good luck. Next time, you won't be so lucky. Li Yundong glanced at him and smiled. He was too lazy to argue with him. He turned his head and whispered to Chao Kefi. President Chao, how do you feel? Chao Kefi frowned slightly. She covered her heart with one hand, as if Xueqi was holding her heart. She forced a smile and said softly, Li Yundong, you saved my life again. What can I do to repay you? Li Yundong chuckled and said, look at what you're saying. We're friends. Don't say that. Friends. Chao Kefi's plump red lips gently spat out 3 words. She looked at Li Yundong with blurred and complicated eyes, as if she had thousands of words to say, but she didn't know where to start. At this time, Lu Feier also rushed over and grabbed Chao Kefi's hand tightly. Her face was covered with tears, and she shouted in a sobbing tone, "Sister Chow, you finally woke up. You scared me to death." Xueqi smiled and said, "Yes, I just dreamed that I was flying. I flew very high, very far. When I was flying in the sky, I suddenly seemed to hear someone calling my name. I couldn't help flying back. When I opened my eyes again, I woke up." Lu Feier smiled through her tears and said, "It was Li Yundong who called your soul back just now." Li Yundong smiled and said, "By the way, President Chow, do you know what's going on?" As he said this, he lowered his voice and asked, "Who on earth wants to kill you?" A look of fear suddenly flashed in Xueqi's eyes. She opened her mouth and was about to speak when she suddenly heard a noise coming from outside. Someone shouted in the corridor, "Get out of the way! Get out of the way!" The people who had been blocking the entrance turned their heads to look and immediately dispersed. Li Yundong and Xueqi turned their heads and saw several policemen barging in, shouting, "Where are the criminals?" Several security guards behind them saw Li Yundong at a glance. They immediately pointed and shouted, "That's him. Many of us were injured." Li Yundong smiled and asked, "You said that I hurt a lot of your people. May I ask who I hurt?" Several security guards said at the same time, We were all injured." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Where is the injury? Can I have a look?" The security guards were stunned. They subconsciously touched their bodies and found that there was no wound on them. Although they had been thrown far away by Li Yundong like a kite, they didn't feel much pain when they fell to the ground. At that time, they were so nervous and scared that they didn't notice these things. Now that they were pointed at by Li Yundong, they were surprised to find that they were not injured at all. The originally aggressive security guards suddenly relaxed. The leading policeman snorted coldly and shouted, "It's not up to you to decide whether or not he was injured." Li Yundong asked, "Then who has the final say?" Another policeman sneered and said, "Nonsense, of course it's up to us to say." Li Yundong laughed and said, "So you mean that it's up to you to say whether you hurt them or not? Even if you didn't hurt them, you can say that you hurt them?" When the policeman heard this, he couldn't help but say angrily, "What do you mean by that? Be careful, or I'll arrest you for slander." Li Yundong glanced at the two of them and shook his head secretly. He thought for a moment and said to the security guards, "Tonight was actually a misunderstanding. I was in a hurry to save my friend, but you stopped me from going, so there was some conflict. If possible, I'm willing to settle this matter privately." At this time, a lobby manager in a suit and leather shoes walked out of the crowd. He snorted coldly and said, "Settle it privately? Do you know how bad the impact of this matter on our Dihao building is? No, this matter must not be settled privately." The two policemen were also very cooperative. One of them took a step closer and stared at Li Yundong covetously, while the other took out a pair of handcuffs from his arms and showed them. Sister Hong and the fake foreigner immediately gloated in their hearts. They shouted in their hearts, "Catch him, catch him." Seeing that things were not going well, Xueqi endured the discomfort and said loudly, "I can testify that he did come to save me. Is it against the law to save someone?" A policeman said coldly, "If you hurt someone in the process of saving someone, it's also against the law." Xueqi couldn't help but say angrily, "The law is nothing more than human feelings. How can you be so heartless? Nowadays, law enforcement needs to be humane. How do you enforce the law? Who is your leader?" When the policeman saw Xueqi's angry expression, he was stunned for a moment, and his saliva almost fell down. When he came to his senses, he shouted with a straight face, "Don't talk nonsense. Come with us." Xueqi was shocked and angry, but she was also a person who had seen big scenes. She forcibly suppressed her anger and began to look through her mobile phone quietly. The other policeman who came with him had better eyesight than his companion. Seeing that Xueqi's temperament was different from ordinary people, he hesitated for a moment. He felt that this matter could be big or small, but if it was really big, if the other party had a very strong background, then he, a small policeman, would not be able to bear the consequences. He turned to the lobby manager behind him and whispered a few words to him. The lobby manager snorted. He thought for a moment and was about to speak when he suddenly heard a dignified voice not far away. "Xiao Lu, what are you doing here?" The policeman named Xiao Lu turned his head and saw a middle-aged man in casual clothes looking at him majestically. He was shocked and trotted over quickly. He saluted respectfully and said loudly, "Director Gong, I'm on a mission." Director Gong frowned and said, "What kind of mission is it? Take me to have a look." Xiao Lu smiled apologetically and said, "It's just a small matter. How can it be worth your time?" Director Gong snorted and said, "It's just a small matter, but it's so big. If it's really a big matter, are you going to tear the earth apart?" As he spoke, Director Gong put his hands behind his back and walked through the corridor like a beast king patrolling the mountains. The people who had been watching the fun in the corridor made way for him in awe. The lobby manager's face was full of smiles at this time. He took out a pack of cigarettes from nowhere and handed it over with a smile. "Director Gong, I'm really sorry to disturb your rest." "I'm sorry, I'll ask someone to send you 2 late-night snacks later." Director Gong pushed away the cigarette in his hand with a righteous expression and said in a deep voice, "I don't smoke. What the hell is going on here?" The lobby manager said with a smile, "In fact, it's nothing much. It's just that someone broke into our Dihao hotel and hurt someone. Now these 2 policemen are going to arrest him." Director Gong snorted and said, "So arrogant? Dihao is one of the few 5-star hotels in Tiannan City. How dare they act so recklessly? Is there any law or regulation in this person's eyes? They must be severely punished." The lobby manager smiled even more brightly. "Director Gong is wise. Well said. This kind of wind can't be allowed to continue. Otherwise, the face of Dihao will be lost, and so will your face, won't it?" Director Gong shouted with a straight face, "Nonsense. What does my face have to do with Dihao?" The lobby manager's smile did not diminish, but he sneered in his heart, Continue pretending. So much money is paid to you every year, and you continue to pretend." Director Gong pretended to inspect the place. Another policeman, who had originally advocated arresting the suspect, also came over at this time and saluted. "Director Gong, this suspect has an accomplice. Should we arrest them together?" Director Gong looked at the policeman and nodded. "It's Xiao Zhang." "What? This suspect has an accomplice. Arrest them all. We can't let go of any of the suspects and accomplices." Xiao Zhang was overjoyed. He turned around and was about to go into the room to arrest the suspect, but suddenly he heard Director Gong ask, "Is the suspect inside? Who is so arrogant?" Xiao Zhang quickly turned around and welcomed Director Gong into the room. Then, he pointed at Li Yundong and shouted, "This person is the suspect." Director Gong took a closer look and saw that the boy was looking at him coldly. Not only was there no fear or uneasiness in his eyes, but they were full of mockery and disdain. He subconsciously became angry in his heart, but soon he found that the person in front of him seemed to be a little familiar. He was shocked and carefully looked at Li Yundong with his eyes wide open. Director Gong looked at him for a long time and asked tentatively, "Are you Li Yundong?" Li Yundong was stunned. "Do you know me?" Director Gong's face suddenly burst into an extremely bright smile. It was hard for others to imagine that his middle-aged face, which had been full of dignity and coldness just a moment ago, could burst into a cheerful smile like that of a baby. He rushed over quickly, grabbed Li Yundong's hand tightly with both hands, shook it up and down with all his might, and said loudly, "Child Li is really forgetful. We just met during the day. I went to your tea house when it opened." At this time, the people inside and outside the room were all sweating, especially the policeman, Xiao Zhang, who had clamored to arrest him. He was sweating profusely, and his whole body was stiff as if he were sitting on wax. Sister Hong and the fake foreigner, who had been gloating and wanted to watch the fun, looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape, as if they were looking at a visitor from outer space. When Li Yundong opened the tea house today, there were at least 70 or 80 celebrities from all walks of life. Just the names and official positions of these people made him dizzy. How could he remember who the middle-aged man in front of him was? But when Li Yundong saw that the other party was so enthusiastic and the smile on his face was as bright as a sunflower, he couldn't lose his temper. As the saying goes, don't hit a smiling person, right? Li Yundong pretended to be suddenly enlightened. He smiled and said, "Ah, I remember. I'm so sorry. Hello, Director Gong." Director Gong smiled very warmly. He asked knowingly, "Why are you here today, Child Li?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I came to save a friend, but there was a misunderstanding with Dihao." As he said this, he glanced at the policeman who had clamored to arrest him. As soon as Li Yundong's gaze swept over the place, The people there immediately broke out in a cold sweat, especially the lobby manager, who refused to settle the matter privately. He secretly regretted it so much that he wanted to slap himself in the face. What kind of background could make the director of the city's public security bureau so close to him, and even with some flattery? What kind of background could he have? He had provoked such a devil. How could he survive in Tiannan City? Chapter 426. Go to watch net. While the lobby manager was thinking about how to deal with the situation, Director Gong asked the two policemen behind him loudly, "Are you here to arrest Childly?" The policeman named Xiao Zhang was tongue-tied. His forehead was covered with beads of sweat that kept rolling down. His tongue seemed to be tied, and he couldn't speak. The other policeman named Xiao Lu was obviously much smarter. He said loudly, "Director, we are here to understand the situation." Director Gong glanced at him and was secretly satisfied with his alertness and response. He nodded and said, "Well, how is the situation?" Xiao Lu couldn't help but sweat rolling down his body. He looked at Xueqi and then at Li Yundong, complaining to himself, "Oh my God, how can I take back what I just said? Isn't this like slapping myself in the face?" But when his eyes fell on the lobby manager, he suddenly had an idea. "I got it. My friend in the Tao will die, but I won't. I've found a scapegoat." Xiao Lu pointed to the lobby manager and said loudly, "Manager Wang knows the best. Let him speak." Manager Wang was so angry that he almost cursed out loud. "Mother Cur, it's fine that you often come to my place to catch a few prostitutes. How dare you frame me? You really can't be trusted." But as angry as he was, he still had to say something. Manager Wang wiped the sweat from his forehead and said in a hollow voice, "In fact, it's just a small misunderstanding. Childly is just eager to save people. Haha, it's okay, it's okay. It's just a small matter." As he spoke, he suddenly thought of something and thought to himself, "Damn it, if these two stinky policemen can push this kind of trouble to me, can't I push it to someone else?" As he said this, he turned his head and shouted at the security guards behind him, "Are you injured or not?" The security guards were dumbfounded. They hadn't expected that such a big responsibility would be thrown to them one after another. They secretly cursed, but the lobby manager was the brother-in-law of the new mistress of the chairman of Dihao. No matter how much they complained, they didn't dare to offend him. Go to watch net. The security guards all said with sad faces, "No, we're not injured at all." Manager Wang said angrily, "If you're not injured, why are you shouting? The flood nearly destroyed the Dragon King temple." These security guards were so aggrieved that they were about to cry. They all drooped their heads and dared not speak up. Seeing this, Li Yundong also said, "It's not their fault. It's my fault. Just let it go." Unexpectedly, Director Gong suddenly shouted, "No, we can't go there like this." At this time, everyone couldn't help but look at the chameleon director strangely. They thought to themselves, "Is this director going crazy again and going to enforce the law impartially?" Director Gong said righteously, "Childly, you came to Dihao to save people at such a late hour. What kind of spirit is this?" This was a spirit of abandoning oneself and forgetting others. This was a chivalrous spirit. This is a kind of dedication that is missing in our current society. This spirit must be vigorously propagated and carried forward. I want everyone in Tiannan City to know young Master Li's chivalrous heart. When he said this, almost all the people around him almost vomited on the spot. They all looked at Director Gong strangely and thought to themselves, "You were the one who said that you would arrest people before. Now you don't want to arrest them, but you're actually flattering them shamelessly. It's too disgusting, isn't it?" Xueqi couldn't help but look at the director of the Public Security Bureau with disdain and spit in her heart. Everyone loved flattery, and even Li Yundong was no exception. However, Li Yundong was a little overwhelmed by this kind of heavyweight flattery. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, "Director Gong, there's no need for that, is there?" Director Gong thought that Li Yundong was pretending to be polite, so he dragged his voice and said, "Hey, Childly, what are you talking about? How can you not use it? This is a great opportunity to publicize and educate the general public." Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart and muttered in his heart, "I guess that after you finish the publicity, I will become a spoiled brat in the eyes of the general public." Li Yundong quickly waved his hand and said, No, there's really no need. Keep a low profile, you have to keep a low profile. Director Gong suddenly understood and said with admiration, after all, Child Li's realm is high. I admire you. Li Yundong smiled dryly and said, no, Director Gong, you're too polite. I have one thing I want to ask Director Gong for help with. After that, he whispered a few words in Director Gong's ear. When Director Gong heard this, he was immediately overjoyed. He patted his chest and said, this is a small matter, no problem. When do you want this report, Child Li? I'll send it to you. Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, you'd better give it to me as soon as possible. In addition, as for today's matter, I can settle it with Manager Wang in private. There's no need to involve so many people in these things. Li Yundong's words were unintentional, but both Director Gong and Manager Wang were listening attentively. Director Gong laughed and said, well, you guys have a good agreement. If there's any bad agreement, Child Li, you can come to me. As he said this, he glanced at Manager Wang intentionally or unintentionally. Manager Wang suddenly shivered and gritted his teeth with hatred in his heart. Damn it! Director Gong is threatening me. F***CK. I'm going to bleed again today. I just don't know how big this Child Li's appetite is. Thinking of this, Manager Wang clenched his trouser pocket tightly. He forced a smile on his face and said to Li Yundong, Child Li, can I have a word with you? Li Yundong nodded and walked to a deserted place in the corridor with Manager Wang. Just as Li Yundong was about to speak, Manager Wang rushed to say, Child Li, I know that I didn't recognize Mount Tai today and offended you. Please be merciful and let me live. How much do you want? Name a price. As long as I can afford it, I'll send it over without hesitation. When Li Yundong heard this, he was stunned and thought to himself, no way. It was obviously me who caused trouble. How did it become him paying me? Manager Wang's heart trembled when he saw Li Yundong's blank expression. He gritted his teeth and said, Child Li, 100,000 yuan, 100,000 yuan. What do you think? Li Yundong was shocked and thought to himself, damn it, such a small matter can be worth 100,000 yuan? Is this more powerful than extortion? Manager Wang saw that Li Yundong still didn't speak, and his heart was bleeding with hatred. He said again, Child Li, it's not easy for us to do business. Please give us 200,000 yuan. What do you think? At this time, Li Yundong saw that Manager Wang's eyes were bloodshot, and his eyes were so ferocious that he seemed to want to sell his mother. He quickly shook his head and said, No, I didn't mean that. Manager Wang's face turned pale and he cried in his heart. Damn it, what do you mean? You don't want money. What do you want? The woman around you is so beautiful, and you have a big star. I don't think I need to find a woman for you. You don't want money, you don't want women, what do you want? Ah, by the way, didn't Director Gong say that he opened a tea house before? Yes, it must be like this. Child Li is probably afraid of leaving something behind, so he must be counting on me to buy his tea house voucher. Humph, what a wishful thinking. Manager Wang's heart skipped a beat and he said, Child Li, I know that you opened a tea house. How about I use public funds to buy your tea house voucher of 200,000 yuan every year? Li Yundong was dumbfounded. He thought to himself, is this guy out of his mind? Does he have too much money to spend? Manager Wang saw that Li Yundong still didn't speak, and thought that Li Yundong wouldn't agree, so he asked tentatively, how about 300,000 yuan? Young Master Li, please say something. Oh, I beg you, 400,000 yuan, 400,000 yuan, no more. If it's more, I won't be able to explain. Only then did Li Yundong come to his senses. He had a strange expression on his face and thought to himself, does this guy think I'm a rich second generation who wants to rip me off? Manager Wang's heart trembled when he saw Li Yundong's strange expression. He suddenly gritted his teeth and said, 500,000 yuan, Child Li, I'm very sincere. Please say something. Li Yundong saw that Manager Wang was about to go crazy. If he didn't say anything, he was afraid that this guy would want to dig his ancestors' graves. He quickly said, don't add it anymore. Manager Wang finally let out a sigh of relief. At this time, he only wanted to send this god of plague away as soon as possible. He couldn't care about anything else now. Manager Wang immediately said, "Child Li, a gentleman's word is as fast as a whip. I'll send someone to your tea house tomorrow to settle this matter. You can rest assured that I won't dare to lie to you." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "No, it's not that." Manager Wang trembled with fear. His legs trembled and he thought to himself, "What else can this man do? Oh my God, I'd better run away quickly. I can't afford to offend him, can't I?" Manager Wang didn't wait for Li Yundong to speak again. He grabbed Li Yundong's hand and shook it twice. "It's a deal, Child Li," he said loudly. "I'll go deal with other things first. I'll come back later to apologize." After that, he turned around and ran away, as if the back of his pants was on fire. Li Yundong was stunned on the spot. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he said, "Damn it, am I that scary? Why can't I be a good person these days?" But on second thought, he couldn't help but sigh at the power of worldly power. A misunderstanding could solve the business problem of the tea house. This was equivalent to signing a business order of 500,000 yuan. Should I accept the money or not? Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly for a moment. Just as he was hesitating about whether to return the money or not, he suddenly heard Xueqi calling his name behind him. Li Yundong looked back and saw that Xueqi was wearing a fur coat, which made her look elegant and extraordinary. She looked at him with a lazy and charming face and said with a smile, "What are you daydreaming about? I've called you several times." Li Yundong came to his senses and said with a smile without thinking, "I was thinking that it's really strange recently. Wherever I go I can meet people I know." Xueqi looked at Li Yundong, and for a moment, her eyes were a little dazed. In her impression, this boy was still young and inexperienced a few months ago. Although he had all kinds of magical abilities, he was still an ordinary person after all, and she could even look down on him. But now, she had to stand on her tiptoes and look up to see him. How could a person climb so fast? How high could he climb in the future? Thinking of this, Xueqi couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. She sighed faintly and said, "Everyone in the world knows me." Li Yundong was stunned. He didn't know Xueqi's thoughts as a woman. He only felt that her words were full of sarcasm and mockery. Li Yundong recalled these words and couldn't help but laugh out loud. Who in the world doesn't know the king? After laughing for a while, he noticed that Xueqi was carrying a bag in her hand. Lu Feier and her agent, Sister Hong, were also standing next to her, as if they were going out. He asked curiously, "Where are you going?" Xueqi smiled and said, "So many things have happened, and Lu Feier's whereabouts have been discovered by the fans. We have to go back to Sonya as soon as possible." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then be careful on the way." Sister Hong, who was standing to one side, looked at Li Yundong strangely. After experiencing these things, she no longer dared to glare at Li Yundong. Lu Feier looked at Li Yundong with some reluctance. She waved her hand and smiled sweetly. "Hey, Immortal Li, I'll go first. When you have time, you can come to the crew to see me." Li Yundong smiled and waved his hand. "Okay, I'll go back when I'm free." Speaking of this, Li Yundong suddenly said to Xueqi, "By the way, President Chao, can you stay for 2 or 3 days and do me a favor?" Xueqi didn't want to leave, but she couldn't find a reason to stay. When she heard Li Yundong's words, she immediately beamed with joy and said without hesitation, "Okay." Lu Feier snorted. "You only care about the opposite sex. Sister Chao, you've gone too far. I'm ignoring you." Xueqi smiled and pinched her cheek. "Well, I'll compensate you when we go back. Be good. The crew is waiting for you to go back to film. They can't do it without you, but it doesn't matter without me." Lu Feier snorted, and Sister Hong, who was next to her, also tried to persuade her. "Feier, listen to President Chao. You really should go back. Do you want to stay and see the headlines of the entertainment section of Tiannan Daily tomorrow?" Only then did Lu Feier say resentfully, "Well, you two don't have to sing a duet." "I know." After that, she got into the elevator with flagging interest. After watching her and her agent disappear from his sight, Li Yundong whispered a few words to Xueqi. Hearing this, Xueqi was slightly shocked and blurted out, "You want me to continue pretending to be dead?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "No, so many people have seen that you're not dead. I just want you to continue pretending to be half dead." Xueqi asked curiously why. Li Yundong smiled confidently. It's very simple. Don't you want to know who wants to kill you? Humph, this is called inviting the enemy to enter the urn. Chapter 427. Go to watch net. When Li Yundong returned home, it was already late at night, but the house was still brightly lit. Everyone was waiting for his return. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. Zi Yuan was sitting cross-legged in a corner with her eyes closed. The three Sherbua of the Fox Zen school were sitting cross-legged on the carpet near the sofa, as if they were meditating and practicing qi. Xueqi paced back and forth at the balcony door, her head lowered as she pondered about something. Ruan Hongling and the little foxes of the Fox Zen school were sitting on the carpet in the middle of the living room, watching the evening news on the TV station. Su Chan was sitting on the side closest to the balcony, hugging her knees and resting her chin on them. Although her face was facing the TV, her eyes glanced out of the balcony from time to time. After living in the secular world for a while, the little foxes gradually became accustomed to television and had a general understanding of the contents of the television. As they watched the news, they whispered to each other, "Hey, do you think we're in the news?" "I don't know, but there should be. I think I saw a guy shooting for a while." "Didn't fourth junior sister say that she saw the news in Tiannan City when she came back tonight? Can you watch the replay now?" "Idiot, the evening news is not a repeat. You don't even know that." "Yes, you're smart. You watched the news broadcast as if it was a TV drama." While they were arguing in a low voice, a little fox suddenly pointed at the TV in surprise and shouted, "Look, it's our Desanxian." As soon as she said this, the little foxes immediately gathered in front of the TV. Xueqi also stopped and looked at the TV. Even the three Sherbua of the Fox Zen school opened their eyes, leaned over, and watched curiously. Only Zi Yuan opened her eyes slightly, smiled, and then closed them again. Su Chan pointed at the TV and shouted in surprise, "It's me! Look, it's me!" The little foxes also pointed at themselves on the TV excitedly. "Me too." Those who couldn't find it shouted, "Damn it, I didn't even see myself, and the image is gone." Ruan Hongling saw that the little foxes' faces were almost glued to the TV. Their heads were shaking, so she couldn't find them for a long time. She couldn't help but say sourly, "You're really ignorant. What's so strange about being on TV?" As soon as she finished speaking, Su Chan turned around and said with a smile, "Hongling, I see you." When Ruan Hongling heard this, she immediately leaned over and widened her eyes. Where? Su Chan had a mischievous smile on her face. She stuck out her tongue and giggled. "The scene is over." Ruan Hongling immediately said angrily, "Are you playing with me?" Su Chan shook her head and said, "Well, it's nothing." "Hongling, you're right. What's so strange about being on TV? It doesn't matter if you don't see it, right?" Ruan Hongling was furious. She stared at Su Chan with her eyes wide open and thought to herself, "Well, she wants to fight with me. This little fox spirit, it's fine if she can't get along with me on normal days, but how dare she challenge me at this time?" The two of them were staring at each other like fighting cocks. Xueqi suddenly pushed open the door on the balcony and said with a smile, "Master, you're back?" Su Chan turned her head abruptly and said in surprise, "Yundong is back?" At this time, everyone in the living room stood up and looked at the balcony in unison. They saw Li Yundong walking in from the balcony with a sullen face. Everyone saw Li Yundong's serious expression. As soon as he entered the living room, the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. They all looked at each other for a moment, not knowing what had happened and feeling uneasy. Seeing Li Yundong like this, although Su Chan was also a little nervous, she still relied on her close relationship with Li Yundong to ask boldly, "Yundong, what happened?" Li Yundong glanced at her, patted her head, and then smiled slightly. "It's nothing. President Chao was attacked." Everyone suddenly exclaimed. Su Chan couldn't help grabbing Li Yundong's hand and asking with concern, "What's going on, Yundong? Is President Chao all right?" Li Yundong's eyes quickly swept across the crowd. He shook his head and said, "She's fine now. I've already taken her to the hospital." Xueqi asked, "Is President Chao being chased by debt collectors again?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "No, someone deliberately wanted to kill her." Xueqi couldn't help frowning. "Who wanted to kill her?" What kind of enemy does she have? Li Yundong said in a deep voice, I don't know, but I think President Chow will tell us when she wakes up. At this time, Xueqi couldn't help but ask in surprise. Is President Chow all right? Li Yundong glanced at her and said with a smile, she should be fine. She's still in the hospital for observation. Xueqi couldn't help patting her chest and said with a smile, Ba, that's great. Li Yundong smiled non-committally and said, well, it's over for the time being. The police have already arranged for someone to protect her. Nothing will happen to her again. As he spoke, he nodded to Zi Yuan and winked at Zhou Qin. Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, come to my room. Also, everyone, go to bed. It's late. Everyone immediately scattered and went back to their rooms. Su Chan saw that Li Yundong had talked to Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin, but not her. It was obvious that he felt that she was unreliable and not a person to discuss things with. She pouted and was a little unhappy, but soon, her eyes rolled and a sly smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. After Li Yundong entered the room, he watched Zhou Qin close the door and said in a low voice, Zhou Qin, today's opening ceremony is over. Can you consider preparing to go to the Xueqi phase? Zhou Qin hadn't expected that Li Yundong would call her in and say such a thing. She looked at Li Yundong bitterly, sighed slightly in her heart, and said faintly, Are you in such a hurry to drive me away? Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, but then he couldn't help laughing. He waved at Zhou Qin and whispered a few words in her ear. When Zhou Qin heard this, she was surprised and asked, Is that okay? Li Yundong smiled confidently and said, Don't worry, it doesn't matter whether it works or not. If it doesn't work, you can continue to move forward and go to the Xueqi phase. If it works, you can just pull out the poisonous thorn in your heart. Zhou Qin thought for a moment, then nodded and said decisively, Okay. Then I'll go and prepare. Zi Yuan saw that Zhou Qin's attitude had changed 180 degrees after listening to Li Yundong's words. After Zhou Qin left, she couldn't help laughing and said, What did you say to her? Why are you being so mysterious? Li Yundong chuckled and said, It's a secret. But you'll know soon enough. Zi Yuan couldn't help but say angrily, Then why did you call me in? Are you keeping me guessing? Li Yundong smiled and said, Don't be angry. I did call you in because I have something to discuss with you. Zi Yuan glared at Li Yundong and said, What's the matter? Hurry up and say it. Li Yundong saw that Zi Yuan, who had always been as elegant as a fairy, actually showed such a rare look of a girl. Her beautiful eyes were full of hope, and her fairy face was both angry and happy. It was as if a young girl was angry at her boyfriend. Li Yundong was a little stunned, and his gaze made Zi Yuan come back to her senses. She turned her head away awkwardly, her ears blushing and her eyes flickering. For a moment, both of them were a little embarrassed and speechless. There seemed to be a faint ambiguity flowing in the air. After a long time, Li Yundong coughed dryly and told Zi Yuan about what had happened that night. Then he said, When we targeted Zhuang Yuting and Chao Yi, Zhuang Yuting first took the initiative to expose Chao Yi. Don't you think it's too much of a coincidence? Zi Yuan gradually calmed down. She stroked the black hair at her temples, her eyes narrowed, and she thought for a moment before saying, According to what you just said, there are a few coincidences in what happened tonight. First, why was Chao Kefi attacked? Moreover, the other party tried to kill Chao Kefi by dispersing her soul. This means that this person must be a cultivator. And why would a cultivator risk being struck to death by heavenly thunder to try to kill a mortal like Chao Kefi? Li Yundong nodded and said, That's right. And the second coincidence is, how did this person know where Chao Kefi and the others were staying? Zi Yuan also said naturally, Unless this person has been watching Chao Kefi from the beginning and has been following her all the way to the place where she is staying. Li Yundong continued, There is another possibility. That is, this person heard Chao Kefi say where she was staying when de Sanxian left. Zi Yuan's eyes suddenly lit up. She smiled coldly and said, Hey, did you notice that when Chao Kefi first came, who in the Fox Zen school showed the most unusual emotions? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, You told me about this. Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting were the most unusual. They looked as if they had seen a visitor from outer space, and their faces were full of shock and disbelief. Zi Yuan nodded slightly and said, It's a pity that their emotions only showed for a moment and soon disappeared. I didn't pay much attention to their other emotions. However, judging from their reactions and our previous inference, the identity of the culprit who attacked Xueqi is obvious. It is very likely that the one who attacked Xueqi was second Shibua Yanfeng. Li Yundong nodded slowly. He sighed softly and said, "This is also what I don't understand the most. If it was really Yanfeng, why did she attack Xueqi? Moreover, she had 10,000 ways to kill Xueqi. Why did she choose to shatter Xueqi's soul?" After pondering for a while, Ziyuan said, "If an ordinary person is killed, his 3 souls and 7 spirits will temporarily stay in his body for a period of time and not dissipate. Just like Deng Yu and Deng Zhao, cultivators can give them a new life by restraining their 3 souls and 7 spirits. But if the other party's soul is forced out of the body, if the soul doesn't return to the body within an hour, although the body is still alive, it will actually become a vegetable. In this way, the other party doesn't have to risk killing the other party and attracting the heavenly thunder. And it can also make it impossible for the other party to gather the soul to resurrect the person. Because once the soul is scattered, the person's spiritual energy will be scattered between heaven and earth, and it can no longer be gathered. Unless..." Li Yundong listened attentively. When he heard the last round, he saw that Ziyuan hesitated slightly and didn't continue, so he asked casually, "Unless what?" Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "Nothing. In short, this person wants Xueqi to become a vegetable, but she doesn't actually want to kill her." Li Yundong didn't take Ziyuan's hesitation to heart. He continued to ponder what had happened tonight. After thinking for a while he said, "In short, this matter is very strange. Why did Yanfeng attack Xueqi? The motive of this matter is very confusing." As he spoke, Li Yundong seemed to think of something. He asked again, "By the way, why does Xueqi only have 1 soul and 3 spirits?" Ziyuan also shook her head and smiled helplessly. "I don't know either. It's the first time I've met such a person." Li Yundong thought for a while, but he couldn't figure it out. He smiled and said, "Forget it, don't think about it. The truth will come out. Moreover, I feel that in the next 2 days, Yanfeng will not be able to bear it. Tomorrow she will." Before he could finish his words, he suddenly heard a knock on the door. Li Yundong said in a deep voice, "Come in." With a creak, the little girl's eyes rolled around and she poked her head in. She asked tentatively, "Yundong, can I come in?" Li Yundong scolded with a smile, "You've already come in half. Can I stuff you back in? Come in. What's the matter?" Su Chan jumped in with a smile, threw herself into Li Yundong's arms, and said coquettishly, "I have something to talk to you about." Seeing this, Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "I'll go back first. Let's talk about it tomorrow." Li Yundong nodded at her with a smile and said, "Okay, let's see Xueqi off tomorrow." After Su Chan watched Ziyuan leave, she blinked and asked curiously, "Is Sister Xueqi going to the Zhuji phase tomorrow?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Yes, her cultivation has improved by leaps and bounds. It can be said that she has made rapid progress. Tomorrow, she should also set foot on the road to the Zhuji phase. By the way, why are you looking for me?" Su Chan giggled and said mysteriously, "Yundong, there are 2 things I don't know if I should say to you or not." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Is there anything you can't say to me? Say it, silly girl." Su Chan nodded. She stood on tiptoe and whispered a few words into Li Yundong's ear. At first, Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's just the 2 of us. Why are you being so mysterious?" But soon, the smile on Li Yundong's face disappeared. He asked with a cold expression, "Is what you said true?" Vote for recommendation, previous page, return to table of contents, next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 428. Go to watch net. In the face of Li Yundong's rhetorical question, Su Chan nodded vigorously and said, "It's absolutely true. I've confirmed it twice. And last time, I heard someone quarreling with Shibua in her room." Li Yundong frowned and pondered for a while, then asked in a deep voice, "Who else knows about this?" Su Chan blinked her eyes and said, Just me. Go to watch net. 7K. O.M. A smile appeared on Li Yundong's face. He stroked the girl's hair with relief and said softly, "My girl knows how to share my worries and difficulties." Su Chan smiled sweetly. The girl held Li Yundong's arm and said in a sweet voice, "I always make trouble for you. I feel sad, so I have to help you in other ways." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Well done, but don't let others know." Su Chan nodded obediently. She asked suspiciously, "Yundong, what are you going to do?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I have my own way. You can go back first. Don't let others find out that something is wrong." Su Chan giggled and said, "I know. Although your girl always causes you trouble sometimes, she is not a fool." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Well, my girl is the smartest." Hearing Li Yundong's praise, Su Chan was so happy that she beamed with joy. She walked to the door, turned around, and waved her hand. She whispered in a sweet voice, "Then I'm leaving." Li Yundong smiled and waved at the girl. After the door was closed, the smile on his face faded little by little, and he looked thoughtful. Under the moonlight, Li Yundong's figure was like a boulder, motionless, deep and cold. At dawn the next day, when the people of the Fox Zen School got up, they were surprised to find that Li Yundong was already standing in the living room early in the morning. Li Yundong stood facing the east-facing balcony with his hands behind his back. His feet were in an irregular position, and the balcony curtains and floor-to-ceiling windows were open. The morning breeze outside blew the corners of his clothes, and the golden morning light was sprinkled on his body like a gauze, making him look like a shining golden pagoda, full of mystery and majesty. The little foxes of the Fox Zen School looked at Li Yundong's back and held their breath for a moment. One by one, they looked at their leader with admiration, as if as long as they stood behind him, they would have nothing to worry about, and everything would be peaceful and happy. Xueqi and Li Yundong had agreed to embark on the Xueqi phase that day, so they came to the living room early in the morning. Seeing the little foxes in the living room in a daze, she followed their gazes out of curiosity. Xueqi was stunned by what she saw. She looked at Li Yundong with infatuation, and her breathing seemed to have stopped. At this time, Li Yundong had slowly lost the sharpness he had when he had just started cultivating. Instead, he was calm and shrewd. In Xueqi's opinion, Li Yundong used to be like a dazzling golden sun, which people couldn't look at directly. But now, Li Yundong was like a towering mountain that people looked up to. "He's growing up so fast." Xueqi sighed slightly in her heart, and there was even a trace of sweetness and joy in her heart. She was not like Su Chan, who had accompanied Li Yundong when he was at his lowest, but she had finally witnessed the boy's slow transformation from immaturity to maturity. In her opinion, nothing could make her happier than watching Li Yundong grow up and mature. This kind of joy even surpassed the joy of her own cultivation. Gradually, more and more people came to the living room. They were all shocked by the different temperament Li Yundong had shown today, and none of them dared to breathe. When everyone had arrived, Li Yundong turned around, nodded slightly, and said in a deep voice, "You must be wondering why I'm posing here so early in the morning." When the little foxes heard Li Yundong's words, they couldn't help but laugh softly. Su Chan and Zi Yuan knew what Li Yundong wanted to say, so they didn't laugh. They just held their breath and waited for Li Yundong to continue. Li Yundong nodded to the crowd and motioned for them to sit down and make themselves at home. He stood in the field and said in a deep voice, "This time, our Fox Zen School has experienced a major event, which is that we have finally opened up our own source of wealth. Desanxian has successfully opened its business, and I believe that after the opening ceremony on the first day, no other sects will dare to strangle our Desanxian. That is to say, from now on, our Fox Zen School will no longer have to rely on others for food and clothing and be afraid." The little foxes were used to Li Yundong's humor and easygoing manner. Suddenly, when they saw Li Yundong speaking with a serious face, they were all a little uncomfortable for a moment. They looked at each other and didn't know whether they should applaud at this time or not. Li Yundong ignored them and continued, In addition to the opening ceremony, there is another event worth celebrating." Li Yundong nodded to Xueqi and motioned for her to come to him. He said, "Xueqi is about to reach the Xueqi phase. Today, I will solemnly teach her a few powerful magical weapons. I hope everyone can bear witness." As the leader of the sect, Li Yundong had absolute control over the powerful magical weapons in the sect, so there was no objection from the Fox Zen School. The little foxes looked at Xueqi eagerly, their eyes full of envy. They all thought to themselves, "This guy is really lucky. She has Renyuan Jindan and a powerful magical weapon given by the leader. I'm so envious." Li Yundong saw that they were all looking at him eagerly, as if he knew what they were thinking. He smiled slightly and said, "Don't be envious. I promise you that in the future, if there are elixirs, you will definitely get them. Moreover, if there are powerful magical weapons, you will definitely get them." When the little foxes heard this, they immediately beamed with joy and shouted, "Long live the emperor!" Li Yundong nodded and raised his hand. The little foxes immediately fell silent and stopped making trouble. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, saw this and felt a little emotional in her heart. Since Li Yundong took over as the leader of the Fox Zen school, although he has been very loved, the little foxes have always been close to him and lack authority. Therefore, the three Sherbois have always been needed to discipline these little foxes. But now, Li Yundong's bearing was enough to subdue these lawless little foxes. At this time, Li Yundong said to Xueqi seriously, "Xueqi, kneel down. Now, as your master, I will teach you powerful magical weapons. I hope that you can make good use of them after you reach the Zhuji phase." Xueqi's face was also full of solemnity. She knelt down respectfully, raised her hands high, and lowered her head slightly. She looked at Li Yundong's shoes and said, "Master, please give me the treasure." Li Yundong took out the cold saw-toothed Vajra wheel from the colorful brocade pouch he carried with him and handed it to her, saying, "This is the powerful magical weapon of Yi Yu of the Fox Zen School. Its original name is the cold saw-toothed Vajra wheel. Now I will rename it Chiwe and give it to you. I hope that you can use it to cut off all the thorns and difficulties on the path of cultivation." Xueqi took it respectfully and put it aside. At this time, Li Yundong took out a fiery red whip from the brocade pouch and said in a deep voice, "Xueqi, take the treasure." Xueqi raised her hands again and said respectfully, "Master, please give me the treasure." Li Yundong said in a deep voice, "This is the powerful magical weapon of LV Fengping of the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua. Although I don't know its original name, I will rename it the Vulcan's Whip today. I hope that it can be carried forward in your hands." Xueqi took it respectfully and placed the Vulcan's Whip beside her. At this time, Wan Hongling, who had been watching the scene, suddenly whispered to Zi Yuan, "Sister Zi Yuan, today is the first time I found that Li Yundong is really serious." Zi Yuan's eyes were fixed on Li Yundong. Without turning her head, she replied with a smile, "Was he not serious when he was on Mount Tianlong?" Wan Hongling snorted. "This guy is always smiling all day long. He's not serious at all. I only remember that he teased me. Who would remember something that happened so long ago?" Zi Yuan watched as Li Yundong solemnly handed over the powerful magical weapons to Xueqi. Her eyes suddenly became a little blurred, as if she wanted to see through the scene in front of her and see a distant picture in the depths of her memory. She murmured dreamily, "I remember." Li Yundong's voice suddenly became incomparably spacious and leisurely in Zi Yuan's ears, as if it had come from a distant place. This dignified and solemn voice reminded her of her master. It was as if that gentle figure was swaying in front of her eyes, and that gentle voice was flowing in her ears. Just as Zi Yuan was in a daze, Ruan Hongling, who was beside her, suddenly stretched out her hand and shook it hard in front of her eyes. She whispered, "Hey, Sister Zi Yuan, what's wrong with you?" Zi Yuan seemed to wake up from a dream. She suddenly came back to her senses. In her eyes, the vague figure in the depths of her memory disappeared, replaced by Li Yundong's figure. There was a strong sense of confusion in Zi Yuan's eyes. She couldn't help comparing her master with the boy in front of her. In her impression, her master was like the clouds and the wind, casual and natural. She had never seen him lose his temper. He was always so calm and natural, and his eyes seemed to see through the world and everything. As for this boy, sometimes he was like fire, and sometimes he was like a mountain. He was dignified and unpredictable. Zi Yuan thought in her heart, and she couldn't help whispering, "They are obviously two completely different people. Why do I always feel that they are so similar?" Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, sighed in her heart. She knew that it was precisely because her Shiji admired her master so much that she had a deep imprint on her. No matter what, she was imitating her master and chasing after his figure and footprints. Sister Zi Yuan used to have an inexplicable love for master, but now she has obviously fallen in love with this guy, but she refuses to admit it. Alas, I don't know when this layer of paper will be broken. Ruan Hongling thought with a sad face. Ruan Hongling knew that once Zi Yuan indulged in chasing after her master's footprints again, she would return to the appearance of an otherworldly fairy. It was fine if it was just this appearance, but what if her sister Zi Yuan was like her master and flew away without caring about anything? What would she do? Wouldn't that mean that he was going to be all alone? Ruan Hongling didn't want Zi Yuan to become like this, but she didn't have any good ideas, so she said casually, "Sister Zi Yuan, why does Li Yundong have to be the leader of the Fox Zen school? If he sets up his own sect, he might be able to become a great master of his generation." At this time, Zi Yuan became slightly sober. She sighed softly and said, "With Li Yundong's talent and opportunities, if he sets up his own sect, he will definitely become a great master in the future." A great master? So exaggerated? Although Ruan Hongling disagreed in her heart, she didn't refute it. The two of them whispered. At this time, Li Yundong took out the third powerful magical weapon from the brocade pouch. When everyone saw this powerful magical weapon, they immediately exclaimed, "Liuha!" Ruan Hongling also opened her mouth wide and whispered, "No way, the Liuha will also be passed on to Xueqi? Aren't you afraid that someone will kill you and take the treasure?" Zi Yuan smiled faintly and did not say anything. At this time, Li Yundong held the Liuha with both hands and said, "Xueqi, take the treasure." Xueqi raised her hands again and said, "Master, please give me the treasure." Li Yundong said, "This is the powerful magical weapon of Yen Fong of the Linggong sect of the Zhengyi school. Now I will pass it to you. I hope you will make good use of it in the future." Xueqi respectfully took the Liuha. At this time, the little foxes of the Fox Zen school were so red that their eyes almost turned into rabbit eyes. It was already good enough for ordinary cultivators to have one powerful magical weapon, but Xueqi had actually received 3 at once, and each of them was an extremely powerful cultivation magical weapon. Isn't this too exaggerated? Is it so profitable to be Li Yundong's disciple? Li Yundong didn't seem to see the pairs of shining eyes of the little foxes. After passing the magical weapons, he was about to speak when he suddenly heard the doorbell ring. Li Yundong looked up and saw Su Chan very cleverly saying, "I'll go and have a look." As she said this, she trotted to the door, opened it, and took a look. Then she turned to Li Yundong and said loudly, "Yundong, it's a woman. She's looking for you." Li Yundong was stunned for a moment and thought, "A woman? Who knows I live here?" Chapter 429. Go to Watch Network. Li Yundong turned around and walked to the door. When he got there, he saw a tall woman in a professional suit standing at the door. Li Yundong asked curiously, "Who are you?" As soon as the woman saw Li Yundong, a bright smile appeared on her face. She said in a deliberately flattering manner, "Child Li, right? I'm an employee of Di Hao. Our manager asked me to deliver something. Go to Quan Net. 7K. OM. Only then did Li Yundong understand that he had extorted a sum of money from the woman in Di Hao yesterday. Early this morning, this sucker had come to give him money. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head and said, "Forget it. You can take all these things back." The woman's face suddenly changed dramatically. She said in a trembling voice, "Child Li, how can you not want it? Didn't we already agree?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "I can't accept it. You can take it back." The woman was anxious and afraid. She was almost crying. She said in a sobbing tone, "Child Li, don't make things difficult for me. I'm just a small employee. It's not easy for me to make a living. You can't make me lose my job." Li Yundong frowned. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Zi Yuan come out and ask softly, "What happened?" When Li Yundong told her what had happened in a low voice, Zi Yuan suddenly laughed. She looked at the woman who was so anxious that she was crying and whispered to Li Yundong, "You went out yesterday and gained a lot. How come I didn't know about this?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I was thinking about other things yesterday, so I forgot to tell you. Besides, it was not a glorious thing, so I was too embarrassed to tell you. I didn't expect that the other party would come to me today." Zi Yuan pursed her lips and said with a smile, "How could they not come to you? You are so cruel. You robbed them of 500,000 yuan without even asking. TSK, what a great deal. If you open your mouth, Bill Gates will have to beg for food. Li Yundong said with a wry smile. Come on, don't gloat. Don't make fun of me. What should I do? Zi Yuan asked curiously. Take it. Why not? Li Yundong was taken aback. No way, he said. Did I hear that right? You're actually encouraging me to accept this kind of money? Zi Yuan smiled and said, have you ever seen a Buddhist refuse any incense money? Do you think these monks don't know that a lot of the money is dirty? Money doesn't matter if it's clean or not, it only depends on who uses it. If you think the money is dirty, then you can use it in a clean place. That will be all right, right? Hee, if all of us cultivators thought like you, we would have starved to death a long time ago. Li Yundong couldn't help but chuckle. He thought for a moment and said readily, okay, let's do as you say. When the woman saw Li Yundong and Zi Yuan whispering to each other, she stretched her neck to listen. However, she could only hear a few vague words, such as cultivators, incense money, and so on. She was confused by what she heard. When Li Yundong turned around, the woman immediately looked at him eagerly. As long as Li Yundong said the word no, she would immediately use her ability to cry, make a scene, and hang herself. Anyway, she would not go back until she completed the task. Li Yundong saw that the woman had put on a posture of long-term resistance, and he was also happy in his heart. He smiled and said, okay, I'll accept it. Don't pretend like I'm bullying good people. The woman immediately breathed a sigh of relief and said with an apologetic smile, Child Li, you are so magnanimous. I really admire you. Hearing this, Li Yundong shook his head secretly. What kind of world is this? The one who gives money is still a grandson, but the one who receives it is a master? Alas, this world is really F***king. Touching. Li Yundong turned to Zi Yuan and said, since you agree to accept the money, you can deal with this matter. I'll go in first. Zi Yuan glared at Li Yundong angrily and said, you want me to clean up your mess for you? You're so shameless. Li Yundong was stunned. He subconsciously looked at Zi Yuan's hand and asked, which hand will help me clean up? Zi Yuan was very embarrassed. She glared at Li Yundong and then walked to her residence opposite. Without looking back, she said to the beauty who had given her money, come with me. After Li Yundong finished speaking, he also felt that what he had said was a little inappropriate. He smiled dryly and walked into the room. When he calmed down, he continued to say to Xueqi, I'm going to walk all the way to the Himalayas and carry out the Xueqi phase on the snowy mountain. Can you persist on this difficult and long journey? In Li Yundong's opinion, although Xueqi had a determined personality, she was from a wealthy family after all, and she loved cleanliness very much. It was really difficult for her to go to Tibet alone and eat in the wind and sleep in the open like he did. Xueqi seemed to know Li Yundong's concerns. She smiled slightly and said, Master, I heard that when Zi Yuan was in the Xueqi phase, she begged alms along the way for more than 2,000 miles, and finally reached the destination to carry out the Xueqi phase. I think I can do what she can do. Li Yundong's eyes were full of admiration. He nodded and said, well, take these powerful magical weapons with you. Don't show them to others. Xueqi nodded seriously and solemnly held the powerful magical weapons in her hands. Li Yundong said to her, go and pack up now. We'll set off in a while. Xueqi nodded and was about to enter the room when she heard the doorbell ring. The little girl was clever and immediately jumped to the door. She opened the door and stuck her head out to take a look. She was immediately startled and ran back to Li Yundong's side. She whispered in his ear, Yundong, there are 2 policemen at the door. Are they looking for you? Li Yundong's eyes narrowed, and he secretly nodded at Su Chan's cleverness. He thought to himself in the past, this little girl would definitely shout and shout. Now, this little girl has also grown up. Li Yundong walked to the door and saw 2 policemen standing there. They were the 2 policemen he had met last night. As soon as he went out, the 2 policemen immediately saluted him. Xiao Zhang, the policeman who had been clamoring to arrest Li Yundong, said with an apologetic smile, Child Li, we meet again. Li Yundong looked him up and down and asked curiously, why are you here? The smile on Xiao Zhang's face suddenly froze, and he didn't know what to say. He wanted to say something soft, but when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he really didn't know how to say them. Xiao Lu, the policeman next to him, was more clever. He quickly handed over a sealed bag in his hand and said with a smile, "Child Li, this is what Director Gong asked us to send." Li Yundong took the sealed bag calmly and said casually, "Did Director Gong ask you to come?" Xiao Zhang suddenly cursed in his heart. "Nonsense, if it weren't for the director asking me to come, I wouldn't have to look at you like this. You just have a great father. What are you so proud of?" Xiao Zhang's face was ugly, but the smile on Xiao Lu's face became more and more brilliant. He said with a smile, "Child Li's guess is really accurate. It was really Director Gong who asked us to come. He said that we offended Child Li last night, and today we have to apologize to you." Li Yundong smiled slightly, glanced at them, and said, "In the future, law enforcement should be more humane. The power given to you by the people is not for you to show off." Xiao Lu quickly nodded and said with a smile, "Child Li is right. You are right to teach us a lesson." Seeing that his companion's face had darkened, he quickly nudged him with his elbow. Xiao Zhang forced out a smile and said dryly, "Yes, yes, young Master Li said it well." Li Yundong saw that his smile was uglier than crying, and Xiao Lu beside him was even more embarrassed. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He didn't want to embarrass the two of them anymore, so he waved his hand and said, "Forget it, you can go. I still have something to do, so I won't greet you anymore." Xiao Lu quickly smiled and said, "Child Li, you are busy. I won't disturb you." After that, he dragged his companion next to him to salute, and then watched Li Yundong turn around and enter the room. Only then did they dare to turn around and leave. After leaving the community, Xiao Zhang spat and said angrily, "How old are you? You haven't even grown a few hairs on your head, yet you are already teaching people like an old man. Who do you think you are?" However, Xiao Lu shook his head and said, "Although this man is young, his bearing is really not small. It's not like you didn't see his background last night. Even Director Gong was polite to him. If he wanted to kill us, wouldn't it be as easy as crushing an ant? But how did you see him talk? What is broad-mindedness? This is broad-mindedness." Xiao Zhang sneered and said, "Humph, if I had powerful parents, I would also have broad-mindedness." Hearing this, Xiao Lu couldn't help but sigh. "Alas, you hate your father for not being strong." The two of them talked all the way out of the community, but Li Yundong didn't know what they were talking about behind his back. He held the sealed bag in his hand and thought about what the two policemen had said and their attitudes just now. He suddenly felt a little emotional. At this moment, Li Yundong completely understood why all sects had worked hard to get close to the royal power since ancient times. Emperor Wu of the Northern Wei dynasty had put Ko Qianji in an important position, so the Northern Heavenly Master Taoism had risen. During the Song dynasty, Emperor Huizong of Song believed in Mount Longhu, so the Zhengyi school had unified the world. Genghis Khan and Kublai had admired Qiu Chuji, so the Chuanjian sect had become famous all over the world. When the sect and the secular power merged into one, the energy it produced would be huge and immeasurable. In the past, if he had encountered such a thing, he would definitely have suffered a great loss. But now, even the director of the Public Security Bureau was smiling at him, and the arrogant policeman had become subservient. Where did all this come from? Li Yundong knew very well that all this came from Zhou Qin's family power and background, but why did Zhou Qin favor him? It was cultivation. It was the transcendental power that cultivation brought to him that attracted her. It's good to cultivate in 6 fan schools. Li Yundong held the sealed bag in his hand and suddenly sighed softly in his heart. He shook his head and threw this little episode out of his mind. He opened the sealed bag and took out the document inside. After glancing at it, he immediately frowned slightly, and a sharp light shot out of his eyes, as if he was lost in thought. It wasn't until Li Yundong came back to his senses that he found Su Chan and the others looking at him. He didn't even dare to breathe. Seeing that Li Yundong wasn't thinking at this time, Su Chan boldly asked, "Yundong, what's wrong with you?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Nothing." As he said this, he whispered to Su Chan, "Come to the room with me. Well. Let's talk to the children. I'll go back to Suzhou on the 10th. I'll break out after I go back. It's really hard to write in Shenzhen. In addition, thank you to the children who voted for PK and VIP tickets. Tang Tang, I thank you very much." I wish you all good luck in the year of the rabbit, and all of you can cultivate to the Yongshan phase. Hahaj. Chapter 430. Go to watch net. Suchan rolled her eyes. Although she was puzzled, she still answered obediently and followed Li Yundong into the room. Go to watch net. Li Yundong entered the room and sat on the edge of the bed. He gently patted his palm with the sealed bag in his right hand. He didn't speak to Suchan, just had a serious look on his face. No one knew what he was thinking. Although Suchan was used to playing with Li Yundong, she didn't dare to play with him when she saw his frown and gloomy face. She just stood aside obediently and didn't make a sound to disturb him. After a while, Suchan felt that the atmosphere in the room was so heavy that the air was about to freeze. She almost wanted to shout. At this time, Li Yundong said, "Chaner, let me ask you again. Are you sure about what you told me before?" Suchan nodded vigorously. "Yes, of course." Li Yundong was silent. After a long time, he let out a long sigh. Seeing his worried face, Suchan asked cautiously, "Yundong, don't be like this. I'm very worried. I still like you when you laugh cheerfully." Li Yundong shook his head, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "When I think that one of the 3 seniors of our Fox Zen school is a traitor, and that I have to find her and kill her with my own hands, I can't smile anymore." Suchan was shocked in her heart, but she didn't show it. Instead, she took Li Yundong's arm and said softly, "Yundong, don't think too much. If you have any troubles and need my help, just tell me. I can also share your burden. I was very sad that you didn't tell me these things before." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "What are you sad about?" Suchan pouted and said with a wronged expression, "Of course, you told Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan, but you didn't tell me. It's unfair. I was smart enough to find some clues." "Humph. I know, you just think that I'm stupid, can't control my words, and often cause trouble for you. I'm just a hindrance. But I'm trying hard to change." Li Yundong saw that Suchan's eyes were filled with tears as she spoke, and his heart was filled with tenderness. He took the little girl's hand, gently held her hand, and said softly, "Silly girl, do you know what I like most about you?" The little girl wiped her tears and thought for a moment. She rolled her eyes and deliberately said foolishly, "Do you like me because I'm beautiful?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Idiot. Look at all the women in this room. Which one of them isn't beautiful? Isn't Zhou Qin pretty? Isn't Zi Yuan beautiful? But why do I like you and not them?" Hearing this, Suchan was secretly happy. She felt sweet in her heart, as if she had eaten honey. She smiled and said, "What do you like about girls? It can't be that you like me being mischievous, right?" Li Yundong chuckled, pinched the tip of the little girl's nose with his hand, and said softly, "I just like your cuteness and purity. I like your innocence." We agreed that after we finished cultivation, we would fly together and travel all over the country. Do you still remember? Hearing this, Suchan was fascinated. She suddenly remembered the days when she and Li Yundong had just met. Her smile suddenly became very warm and gentle. "Of course I remember. At that time, although the 2 of us lived a hard life, we really felt very happy at that time." Hearing this, Li Yundong sighed and said, "Yes, now I am the master of the Fox Zen School, the leader of a sect. We have also established our own foundation, but in the process, we have to be careful every step of the way. Now our situation seems peaceful, but in fact, I feel that every step I take is like walking on thin ice. Moreover, at present, the internal and external troubles of the Fox Zen School are a thorn in my heart. I am worried about it myself. How can I bear to let you worry about this kind of thing?" As he spoke, Li Yundong stroked the little girl's cheek lovingly and said softly, "What do you think will happen if my little girl loses her smile and happiness because of these things?" Suchan was moved when she heard this. She held Li Yundong's hand tightly and said, "Even if I become like that, you can't abandon me. You can't abandon me." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Silly girl, don't talk nonsense. I will make you happy forever. Besides, I will not leave you, no matter what you become." Suchan's heart was overflowing with tenderness when she heard this. She leaned softly into his arms, raised her face, and looked at her lover with infatuation and love in her eyes. She said naively, "Yundong, kiss me." Li Yundong held the little girl's beautiful and charming face and gently pecked her rosy pink lips. Although their lips and teeth separated as soon as they touched, they both felt that the taste was bone-piercing and made their hearts beat faster. Both Li Yundong and Su Chan knew that it was not the time for them to be intimate, so they separated and looked at each other and smiled. They felt that although the kiss was shallow, the sweetness in their hearts went deep into their hearts. It was as if this moment would last forever, and this moment would last until the end of time. Li Yundong held Su Chan in his arms. After a while he patted her on the shoulder and said softly, "Well, Chaner, help me call Xueqi Sherbua here." Su Chan straightened up and said softly, "Yundong, why do you want to call Xueqi Sherbua?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Don't you want to help me share some things?" "I'm asking for your help." Su Chan blinked. "What do you want me to do for you?" Li Yundong waved at Su Chan and motioned for her to come over. Then, he whispered a few words in her ear. When Su Chan heard this, she was slightly shocked. "What are you going to do?" "Yundong, can you be sure?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Now the situation of our Fox Zen school is like hiding a snake in the grass. We know that there is a snake, but we don't know where it is. Therefore, if we keep waiting for the snake to appear on its own, the only result will be that the innocent people around us will be hurt. For example, President Chow. I still don't understand why she was attacked." Su Chan said thoughtfully, "Then Yundong, have you decided to?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Yes, I want to alert the snake." Su Chan nodded and said, "I understand. I'll call Xueqi Sherbua in later." As she spoke, she looked at Li Yundong with some worry and said, "Yundong, you have to pay attention to your own safety. Be careful." At this point, the little girl suddenly swallowed the rest of her words, as if she felt that she was being a little paranoid. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't worry about me. I'm fine. You can go now." Su Chan went out of the door, walked over to Xueqi, and whispered a few words to her. Xueqi was stunned, and a strange look appeared on her face. However, she still smiled at Su Chan, then went upstairs and entered Li Yundong's room. The little foxes of the Fox Zen school did not notice this situation. In their opinion, it was normal for the leader to talk to their Sherbua. They were still talking and laughing. Su Chan saw that they were not paying attention, so she quietly flashed into Chao Yi's room. After entering the room, Su Chan twitched her nose slightly and kept searching for the smell of blood she had smelled before. Her sense of smell was extremely sensitive. After sniffing a few times in the room, she smelled a faint smell of blood in the air. The little girl's spirit was lifted, and she immediately followed the smell. Sure enough, in a hidden corner at the foot of the bed, she found a small package tightly wrapped in a plastic bag. Su Chan opened it and saw that it was the Taoist robe that Xueqi had worn before. Su Chan nodded secretly, hid the package in her arms, and then quietly jumped out from behind the balcony of the room. The little girl jumped onto the balcony of Li Yundong's room and hid outside with her breath held. When Li Yundong coughed in the room, he said in a deep voice, "Little girl, don't hide. Come in." Su Chan gently pushed open the balcony and said with a smile, "Yundong, you are so powerful now. You can even detect my hidden aura." Li Yundong smiled and pointed outside the balcony, saying, "If you want to hide, how many people in the world can detect you? It was your shadow that betrayed you." Su Chan looked back and saw that the sunlight outside had cast a long oblique shadow on her figure. The little girl patted her head and said with some chagrin, "So that's how it is." Li Yundong smiled slightly and asked, "Have you found it?" Su Chan took out a package from her arms. Li Yundong took it and opened it. It was the Taoist robe that Xueqi usually wore. Li Yundong looked carefully and saw a faint bloodstain on the cuffs and ribs of the Taoist robe. Li Yundong nodded to himself. His face was as calm as water, and he didn't say a word. The little girl next to him asked tentatively, "Yundong, what are you thinking? Is Xueqi Sherbua really the traitor?" Li Yundong was silent for a long time. He sighed softly and said non-committally, "I think I already know who the traitor is." Su Chan immediately asked curiously, "Is it Xueqi Sherbua?" Li Yundong glanced at her, touched her soft black hair, and said softly, "Don't ask about these things. You shouldn't get involved in these intrigues. You have done what you can. Leave the rest to me. I will drive the snake out of our Fox Zen school." Su-chan curled up her lips and said reluctantly, "But I'm always worried. You should at least tell me some plans. It's not a big deal if I make a fool of myself, but if I ruin your plan, it will be a big deal." When Li Yundong heard this, he also felt that Su-chan's words made sense. Moreover, at this time it was time to reveal the dagger, so there was no need to hide it anymore. He thought for a moment, then said to Su-chan with a smile, "Do you know why Zhou Qin wants to go to the Zhuji phase at this time?" Su-chan blinked her eyes in confusion. "Isn't it because her cultivation has already reached the required level?" Li Yundong shook his head. "She can go tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. Why is she in such a hurry to go today?" Su-chan was a very smart woman. After being pointed out by Li Yundong, she immediately thought of what had happened to Xueqi before. Her eyes lit up and she let out a soft cry. Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Channer, do you think Yan Feng will choose to continue to find a way to kill Xueqi or take back the Liuhe sword that Zhou Qin is carrying?" Vote recommendation, previous page, return to table of contents, next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your opinion. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.